Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. I was driving home from my cousin Tyler's place off Route 19, taking the old logging road that cuts through the hills behind Pine Hollow. I always use that route when I worked late because it shaved off 15 minutes, even if the pavement ended halfway and the rest was just gravel and dirt. It was around 11:40 p.m., no moon out, and everything felt heavier than usual. The air had that damp, early autumn bite, where it's not cold enough to justify the heater, but not warm enough to crack a window. I wasn't thinking about anything special, just replaying the dumb argument Tyler and I had gotten into about whether his truck needed new brake pads. I probably would have forgotten the whole night if things had stayed normal. About 3 miles in, the tree line dropped away and the road opened to a long, straight stretch that cut between two wide fields. It was the only place on that road where the sky felt huge. I remember noticing how clear the stars were, the kind of clear where you can pick out more than just the usual stuff. I spotted Cassiopeia, then the faint smear of the Milky Way off to the left. I'm not some astronomy nerd or anything, but it was one of those nights where the sky actually pulls your attention. That's why I noticed when a handful of stars blinked out. Not all at once, literally one at a time, like someone passing a hand in front of a flashlight. First one dimmed, then another, then another. A weird wave of darkness sliding across the sky, but not fast. Slow enough that I could track the movement. Slow enough that I found myself leaning forward over the steering wheel without realizing it. I eased my foot off the gas. The truck coasted down to about 25. I stuck my head forward a little, like I could angle around whatever I thought was blocking my view. But there was nothing. No clouds, no trees, nothing that should have been high enough or big enough to do that. I kept waiting for it to make sense. A cloud, a storm front, maybe smoke blowing in from somewhere, but the edges of it were too clean, too straight. Stars vanished behind it like they were being erased. I pulled the truck completely off the road, gravel popping under the tires. For a second, I thought about getting out to see better, but some part of my brain told me to stay inside. Not panic, not fear, just a weird instinct to stay put. I turned off the engine so I could listen. I don't know why, like I thought it might make a sound. It didn't. The whole field went dead quiet, no insects, no wind. Even the truck seemed to settle into silence too fast, like the engine heat wasn't ticking the way it usually did. The dark shape kept moving over me. Or maybe I was under it the whole time and didn't know until it reached that open stretch. Hard to tell. The stars behind it stayed gone, like whatever it was absorbed the light instead of blocking it. When it finally cleared the sky, the stars snapped back. Not dramatically, just there again, like someone took their hand away. I sat there breathing shallow, staring through the windshield. Nothing moved. No lights, no aircraft, no signs of anything. The sky looked normal. The fields looked normal. That's when I noticed the dashboard clock. It read 11:46. I blinked a few times. I squinted at it. I reached up and tapped the plastic cover, like maybe the vibration would make it correct itself. Because the last time I checked, right before that straightaway, it had read 11:43. 3 minutes wasn't much. If you're distracted, it's the kind of thing you don't even pay attention to. But I remember the time because I had checked it right when Tyler texted me a follow-up gripe about the brake pads. I'd looked down, seen it was 11:43, read the message, tossed my phone on the passenger seat, and then got caught up looking at the stars. There was no way 3 minutes passed. Maybe 30 seconds. A minute at most. I know how long it takes to coast to a stop. I know how long I sat there staring at the sky. It wasn't 3 minutes. I kept looking back and forth between the sky and the clock, waiting for the numbers to jump or freeze or do something to prove it was a glitch. But the seconds ticked along normally. I finally restarted the truck and kept driving. I told myself it didn't matter. Clocks drift. My memory wasn't perfect, that kind of thing. But I kept glancing up at the stars every few seconds, even though the road had pulled back into the trees. It felt like something might be above me, even if I couldn't see it. About a mile later, I rounded a bend where the trees grew tight on both sides. There was usually a little bit of moonlight sneaking through the branches on clear nights, but everything looked darker than usual. My headlights felt like they were carving two tunnels out of solid black. That same heavy quiet from the field followed me. No crickets, no owls, not even the rustling brush I usually heard out there. Then the radio crackled. I didn't even realize I'd left it on. It had been low the whole time, just a background whisper of static. But when that crackle hit, it was like someone brushing their fingers over the speaker. I reached out to turn it down, but before I touched the dial, a short burst of sound came through. Not a voice exactly, more like a clipped syllable. Just this sharp, broken ah sound. Fast enough that I couldn't tell if it was a person or something electronic. I turned the radio off completely. A minute later, something moved in the trees to my right. I didn't see anything directly. The headlights didn't reach that far, but I caught the motion in my peripheral vision. Something big enough to shift a branch. Not a deer. Not a person. More like the whole section of brush leaned away for a second. I sped up. Not full on panicking, but enough that the gravel spit behind me. The road eventually opened up again near the old water tower. That was the point where I usually started to relax because it meant the highway was only 5 minutes away. But I felt this weird pressure in my ears right as I passed the tower. Not popping like altitude change, more like my head wanted to tighten around itself. It lasted maybe 2 seconds and then let go. I checked the clock again, 11:53. Nothing strange about that. Time had moved normally since the field. But I still found myself double-checking it against my phone when I hit the next stop sign. The phone said the same thing. I got home about 15 minutes later. When I stepped out of the truck, the night sounded normal again. Bugs, wind, distant traffic, everything like it should be. I stood in my driveway for a minute looking up at the sky, expecting something to shift or dim again. Nothing did. I didn't tell Tyler. I didn't tell anyone for weeks. I kept checking the truck clock every time I drove it, trying to convince myself it had always been off by a few minutes. But it matched my phone every time. The only thing that stayed strange was the stretch of road near the fields. For about a month after that night, every time I drove through there, I felt like something was hovering way up above me, out of sight. Not a sound, not a light, just that same quiet, that same heaviness. It faded eventually. Or I got used to it. But the thing I keep circling back to is how clean the edges were when the stars went dark. Not fuzzy like clouds, not uneven like tree branches. Straight, sharp, like the outline of something huge that wasn't supposed to be there. And those 3 minutes, I know it's nothing, but I can't explain them. And I can't stop thinking about how slow that shadow moved, like it didn't even care I was watching. I woke up because something under the floor was buzzing. Not loud, more like the soft vibration you feel when a big truck idles outside your house. Except I lived in a rental cabin outside Winthrop, up near the Methau trails, and the nearest road was half a mile of dirt away. No reason for any engine to be that close. I sat up halfway, still groggy, trying to figure out if it was coming from my phone. I slapped my hand around the nightstand until I found it, but the screen was off and the phone was cold. The vibration hummed steady for maybe 10 seconds, then faded like someone slowly turning a dial down. The cabin went normal quiet again, just the baseboard heater clicking. I rolled over, thinking maybe it was a weird dream. I'd spent the whole previous day hiking with my friend Mark and his girlfriend, and my legs were wrecked. I figured maybe the muscle spasms carried into my sleep somehow. I was about to close my eyes again when a soft light hit the window. It wasn't bright. More like the sky had turned hazy blue for a second, like sunrise trying to break through fog. I could see the outline of the trees outside, pale and washed out. It wasn't coming from a direction. It was like the whole sky just glowed at once. Then, as fast as it started, it cut to black. Not faded out, snapped off. The cabin dropped back into pitch dark. I sat up fully this time. My heart wasn't racing yet, just confused, the way you get when something doesn't fit with anything you've experienced before. I pulled the curtain back with 2 fingers. The trees looked normal. The stars looked normal. No headlights. No moon. I checked the time. 3 12 a.m. I wasn't scared enough to call anyone, but I also wasn't tired anymore. I swung my legs out of bed and walked to the kitchen to get water. The floor felt weird under my feet. Not vibrating, but like it had warmed up in patches. The cabin didn't have heated floors. I stood there for a moment, nudging my toes around on the boards. The warm spots weren't consistent. One plank was warm, the next was cold, then warm again. I knelt down and pressed my palm against it. It almost felt like someone had been standing there for a while. I tried to convince myself it was some weird heating quirk. Old cabins do things that don't make sense. So I got my water and went to the front door, planning to step onto the porch and look around. When I opened the door, the porch boards were cold like they'd been sitting in winter air for hours. But the dirt past the steps looked off. I didn't notice it at first. I just stared ahead, trying to spot any cars or people. Nothing moved out there except one branch swaying slightly. No wind, just that one branch. Then I realized the dirt looked lighter than it should have. Not glowing, just pale, like someone had dusted it with powdered chalk. I stepped down and crouched to touch it. The soil wasn't cold. It didn't feel dusty either, just looked that way. I felt stupid crouching there in my pajamas, so I went back inside. I tried turning on the porch light and it flicked on like normal. The pale look on the ground didn't change, still evenly lightened. I walked to the back window, the one that faced the slope behind the cabin. I didn't see any weird glow or figures or anything like that, but the pine needles back there had the same washed out look, like they'd been sitting under a UV lamp for hours. It wasn't uniform, just patches here and there, like shapes had moved across them and left those marks. I leaned closer to the glass and noticed something else, a faint buzzing on the window frame. Not sound, vibration. The same kind I'd felt in the floor, but softer now. I pressed my fingertips to the wood. The vibration was steady, like a tiny motor humming in the wall. I stepped back. I suddenly didn't want to touch anything. I walked around the cabin room by room, flicking on lights, checking outlets, making sure nothing electrical was failing. Everything worked. The heater clicked on like normal. The fridge hummed. The lights were steady. But every few minutes, something outside flashed, not the sky this time, just areas of the forest lighting up briefly, like someone holding a giant camera flash behind the tree line. I couldn't see a source, just the glow outlining the trunks and branches. And every time it flashed, the vibration under the floor returned for a second or two. Sometimes strong, sometimes faint, but always timed with the light. By 3:40 a.m., I started pacing because I didn't know what else to do. I kept checking the clock, expecting more time to have passed than it did. The minutes seemed normal though, which somehow made it worse. If something weird happened with time, at least that would have matched the rest of it. At some point, I sat on the couch and stared at the front door, listening for footsteps or engines or anything. The only sound I heard was a single thump on the far side of the cabin. Not a knock. Not an animal. More like something heavy settling its weight on the ground. I froze. The thump didn't repeat. No footsteps followed. I waited for the vibration, but nothing happened. I turned off the lamp so I could see outside better. The window showed only my faint reflection and a slice of the porch. That pale dirt looked slightly darker now, like it was fading back to normal. Around 4 a.m., everything stopped. No more flashes, no vibration, no strange warmth in the floor. It was like someone flipped a switch and the cabin just reset. I waited another 10 minutes before going back outside. The dirt looked normal again. The needles behind the cabin looked like regular forest debris. The branch that moved earlier was still now. I walked the perimeter of the cabin with a flashlight. I didn't see any tracks, no footprints, no tire marks. But when I passed the back corner, the flashlight flickered, then steadied. I tapped it. It was fine. I tried shining it at the same spot again, and it dimmed a little, like something absorbed part of the beam. Nothing was there, just the air. I went inside after that, locked the door, sat in bed until sunrise. I didn't fall asleep, just waited for the light to come in so I could tell myself nothing else weird would happen. Later that morning, when the sun was fully up, everything looked totally normal. The ground, the trees, the boards, the windows. If I hadn't woken up when I did, nothing in the cabin would have hinted that anything unusual ever happened. I ended up staying the rest of the week because I'd already paid for it. But I kept waking up at random hours thinking I heard that vibration again. I never did. Not after that first night. But every time I set a glass down on the table, I waited a second to see if it would tremble on its own. It never did. The cabin stayed quiet. The only part I couldn't shake was that pale flash across the sky. I'd never seen anything like it before. It didn't feel like lightning or headlights or even the northern lights. It felt like the sky itself lit up from within. And every time I think about that moment, I remember how warm the floor was under my feet, like something had passed beneath the cabin before I woke up. I first noticed the tone about 15 minutes outside of Redwater, on the stretch of highway that cuts between the dry creek beds and the old ranch fences. It was around 9:30 p.m., early summer, still warm enough that my windshield had a film of dust stuck to it. I had the windows cracked because the AC in my Subaru liked to quit whenever I drove uphill for too long. I'd been listening to a local classic rock station, but the signal always died once you passed mile marker 122. It should have faded into static. It always did. Instead, the song cut off mid-chorus and the radio switched to a steady tone. Not a harsh emergency alert kind, more like a long, even hum. Flat. No changes in pitch. It didn't waver the way static does. I smacked the side of the radio like an idiot. Nothing changed. I twisted the dial, same tone on every number, even the ones that never picked up anything but fuzz. I checked my phone, thinking maybe it was interfering somehow, but the phone was on airplane mode. The service out there was useless anyway. The tone kept going. Low, even, constant. I kept driving, trying to ignore it. The highway was almost empty, no headlights in either direction. The moon hadn't risen yet, so everything had that faint, grainy darkness where you can see shapes but no details. My headlights kept catching tufts of dry grass and the silver lines of barbed wire fences. Then I saw the glow. It showed up in the corner of my windshield first, like a faint dome of light somewhere above and behind me. It wasn't bright enough to cast shadows inside the car. It was more like when you're driving under a full moon and get that pale wash across the tops of things. I checked my mirrors, expecting to see a car cresting a hill behind me with its high beams angled weird. But there was nothing. The road behind me was pitch black. The glow didn't blink. It didn't sway. It just stayed with me, faint but steady. I tried telling myself it was the reflection of my own dash lights, but when I covered them with my hand, the glow stayed right where it was. After a few seconds, I realized the radio tone was syncing with something. Every now and then, the hum dipped for half a heartbeat, not breaking, just softening, and the glow seemed to brighten at the exact same moments. It wasn't perfect, but close enough to notice. I kept my speed at around 50, hands tight on the wheel. For a while, nothing changed, just the endless hum, the empty road, and that pale glow above me. Then the glow shifted. Not fast, not like something swooping. It just slid slightly to the left, like whatever was making it had changed position. And when it moved, the tone in the radio pulsed, a short, almost undetectable flutter. I slowed down, maybe 5 miles an hour. The glow slowed with me. It stayed the same distance behind and above, like it was tethered to the car. I sped up again. 70. The glow kept pace. Didn't drift, didn't fade, just followed. The tone in the radio didn't get louder or softer. It was locked in that same steady hum, like it wasn't coming from the speakers at all, but from somewhere deeper in the car. I rolled the windows up and turned the radio off entirely. The hum continued, even with the radio shut off. That's the part that made my mouth go dry. Around mile marker 128, the highway curved through a shallow dip between two rock cuts. The glow dimmed a little as I drove under the rock walls, like something above me couldn't follow directly overhead for a moment. When I came out on the other side, it brightened again. That was the moment I realized, whatever it wasn't a reflection. I pressed my foot down harder than I meant to. The Subaru wasn't fast, but it groaned its way up to 75. The glow didn't blink. Up ahead, the town of Redwater finally showed itself. First, the faint orange halo over the grain silos, then a handful of scattered porch lights along the outskirts. Farther ahead, I knew the first streetlight sat just past the gas station that always closed too early. I kept checking the mirrors. The glow was still there, maybe a little brighter now. I didn't want to stop the car. The idea of pulling over on that lonely stretch made my stomach twist. I just wanted to reach town. The radio hum fluttered again. This time it had a rhythm to it. Short dip, long dip, then back to steady. Almost like a pattern. I passed the big rusted billboard that welcomed you to historic Redwater, Est 1904. The first streetlight came into view, buzzing faintly. As soon as the yellowish light from that lamp spilled across the hood of my car, the glow behind me dimmed sharply. I checked the mirror. It was still there, but weaker, flickering a little. The hum in the radio grew thinner, like someone slowly lowering the volume on a speaker. I crossed into town limits and rolled past the old gas station. The glow flickered again, harder this time, like a bulb struggling to stay lit. By the time I reached the first four-way stop, the glow snapped off entirely, gone between one blink and the next. The radio hum cut out at the same moment, leaving the car dead quiet. My ears rang in the sudden silence. The Subaru's engine sounded too loud, too normal. I sat there at the stop sign longer than I needed to, hands still clenched around the wheel. A couple of night shift workers were outside the diner across the street, smoking and talking. One of them waved at me as I passed. Everything in town looked the same as always. Normal. Grounded. I drove to my apartment at the edge of town, parked, and sat in the car with my headlights off for a minute. The sky above Redwater looked empty. No glow, no sound, just stars. Eventually, I went inside. The rooms felt unusually still, like the house was holding its breath. I walked through every space, kitchen, bathroom, bedroom, flipping lights on and off just to hear something familiar. Later, lying in bed, I kept replaying the drive in my head. The steady tone, the way the glow matched my speed, the way it died the moment I hit town light. Around midnight, I got up and looked out the window toward the highway. It was dark, just the occasional pair of headlights cutting across the distance. I didn't see any glow. Nothing followed anyone else down the road. But when I pressed the button on my alarm clock to turn on the little radio it had, the speakers popped softly like they were adjusting to something, then played static for half a second before settling into the regular morning station. I set the clock back down and didn't turn the radio on again. The next day, everything worked normally. The Subaru's radio flipped between stations without any trouble. The AC even held up on the drive to work, but sometimes, when I'm heading home after dark and the sky is clear, I catch myself checking the mirrors for any hint of pale light drifting just above the roofline, waiting for that steady tone that shouldn't have been possible to start humming again. I noticed the thing right after I turned on to Ridgewood Loop, the part of Morning Run where the houses thin out and you can see a big stretch of sky over the elementary school. It was early, maybe 6:05 a.m., and cold enough that my breath looked like steam. The sky was this washed-out gray blue, the kind you get on winter mornings in Oregon when the sun isn't up yet, but the clouds are already glowing. I was halfway through mile 2 when something bright caught my eye above the roofline of the school. At first I thought it was Venus, but it was too bright and it moved. Not fast or anything, just drifting in a lazy diagonal like a satellite or a high-altitude balloon. I slowed my pace, then eventually stopped near the bike racks. I pulled my earbud out and just watched it for a minute. It didn't blink or pulse like a plane, and it didn't arc like something re-entering. Just a steady, white point gliding silently. A woman walking her dog came around the corner. She didn't look up, just tugged the leash and kept moving. I wanted to ask if she saw it too, but it felt weird to bother her at that hour. I kept watching. The dot drifted right, slowed, then stopped. I don't mean it slowed to a hover. I mean it stopped dead in the sky, like someone hit pause. I thought maybe it was an illusion, like maybe it just happened to align with something, but the clouds behind it kept moving, sliding past in slow streaks. My first stupid thought was that my eyes were shaking from running. I blinked hard a couple times. It didn't budge. A few seconds passed, maybe 10, maybe 15, and I felt this pressure in my ears. The same thing I get sometimes when I drive up the mountains too fast. Not painful, just wrong. I swallowed and popped them, but it didn't go away completely. The point of light stayed perfectly still. I pulled out my phone and tried to zoom in, but against the bright sky, it just looked like a little glowing pixel. I lowered the phone again and stared with my naked eyes, trying to make sense of it. Maybe a drone, I thought. But no drone I'd ever seen could hold position that high or that steady. And there was no sound, not even the faint buzzing a drone should make. A thin strip of cloud drifted toward it from the west. It was the kind of cloud that's almost transparent, just a long smear of white stretching across the sky. As it got closer, I caught myself holding my breath, waiting to see the dot either dip below it or blur through it. The cloud passed in front of the spot, and the spot vanished. Not dimmed, not blurred. Gone. The cloud slid away a few seconds later, and the sky behind it was empty. No bright point. No anything. I waited. 30 seconds, maybe. My fingers got cold around my phone. I scanned back and forth across the sky, trying to find it again, but there was nothing. I shoved my phone in my pocket and started running again, but it completely threw off my rhythm. My legs felt stiff, and every time the sky opened between houses, I found myself glancing up. I tried to brush it off. Weird atmospheric reflection. Satellite catching sunlight at a weird angle. Eye floaters. Whatever. I wasn't in the mood to start my day with something unexplainable. I reached the park at the edge of the neighborhood a few minutes later. Normally, I loop around the gravel trail twice before heading home, but as soon as I stepped under the trees lining the entrance, something felt duller. That's the only word I can think of. The air felt flat. The sound of my shoes on the path sounded muted, like someone laid a blanket over the ground. Even the distant highway noise seemed quieter. Halfway around the loop, I noticed a dog standing completely still on the far side of the field. No owner around. Medium-sized, light-colored, maybe a retriever mix. It wasn't staring at me, it was staring straight up. I followed its gaze. There was nothing there. The dog didn't move, not even its tail. I hesitated, wondering if I should go check on it, but something about the way it stood made me keep my distance. After maybe 10 seconds, it blinked a few times, looked around like it forgot what it was doing, then trotted toward the tree line and vanished between the trunks. That pressure in my ears came back again, stronger this time. I swallowed and rubbed the side of my head, waiting for it to fade. It didn't. Not completely. By the time I finished the loop, the sky looked normal. Gray, streaky, boring. I told myself the whole thing was probably just an airplane headed straight toward me before turning. But the way it froze, the complete stillness, didn't fit with that. I headed home along the same route. When I passed the elementary school again, I slowed down without meaning to. The sky above the roofline was empty. I stood there a moment, catching my breath, waiting for, a glint, a flicker, something. Instead, I heard something behind me, a soft crack, like someone stepping on a thin branch. I turned fast, half expecting to see the dog again. No one was there. Just the playground, the swings barely moving in a breeze I couldn't feel on my skin. I started running again. As I reached my street, the pressure in my ears finally faded. It didn't pop or release. It just slowly dissolved like it had never been there. Inside my house, everything looked normal. Coffee maker where I left it, running shoes on the mat, the faint hum of the fridge. I tried to shrug the whole thing off as I stretched, but my mind kept replaying that moment. The clouds slid over the light. Later that afternoon, when I went out to check the mail, I found myself scanning the sky again. Not because I expected the light to be there. Honestly, I hoped it wouldn't be. But because some part of me felt like it might show up anywhere, at any time. Completely silent and impossible. Nothing did. But every morning since, when I lace up my shoes and step outside, the first thing I do is look up and watch for anything that shouldn't be able to stop midair, and wait. I noticed the lights starting to act strange halfway down Alder Street, right after I passed the little corner market that always smelled like old coffee and floor cleaner. It was around 10:45 p.m. early fall, one of those nights where the air feels cool but not cold, and everything has that damp, quiet heaviness. I'd stayed late at my friend Matt's place helping him move furniture around his apartment, and I didn't feel like waiting 40 minutes for the bus, so I decided to walk the 20 minutes back to my place. Alder was usually well lit, old metal street lamps every 30 yards or so, buzzing faintly, the kind of orange glow that made everything look slightly washed out. That night, though, the far end of the block looked dimmer than usual. I thought maybe a bulb was out. It wasn't until I got closer that I realized it wasn't one bulb. It was all of them, going dark one by one. The lamp closest to me was on. The next one flickered, then went black. 2 seconds later, the next one flickered. Then, black. Like dominoes. I slowed down. There was no power outage. The houses on either side of the street still had porch lights on, TVs flickering behind curtains. Just the street lamps were shutting off, and they were doing it in a perfect sequence down the block. I stopped walking entirely when the fifth light blinked out. The darkness was creeping toward me like a curtain being pulled shut. I waited for the lamps behind me, the ones closer to the market, to go out too, but they stayed steady, buzzing normally. Only the ones ahead were failing. I told myself it was probably a wiring issue. Something underground. A breaker tripping. The stupid explanations your brain reaches for, even when they don't fit what you're seeing. The sixth lamp flickered hard enough that the bulb inside rattled, then died. There were two more between me and the big intersection at Cedar Avenue. I could still see some light from the intersection spill into the dark stretch, but it wasn't enough to make me feel better. I checked my phone out of habit. No bars. Not unusual for that area, but it made me feel more alone than I should have. I debated turning around and going back to Matt's instead of continuing, but the idea of walking back past all the houses with dark front yards somehow felt worse. At least the intersection ahead had traffic lights and usually a few cars passing. The seventh lamp died. I took a slow step backward. My heel scraped the pavement louder than it should have. I kept staring into the dark ahead, expecting to see someone. Maybe a city worker in a bucket truck or kids messing with the breaker box. But there was nobody. Just the empty street. The eighth lamp, the one closest to me, flickered wildly, like the bulb was being shaken inside the casing, then blinked out. That left me standing right at the edge of a long, perfect stretch of darkness. The whole block ahead was black now. Not dim, black. Like the light from the intersection couldn't penetrate it fully. My eyes should have adjusted, but they didn't. The dark felt thick. That's when I heard the faint shimmer. Shimmer isn't the right word, but I can't think of a better one. It wasn't a hum or a buzz or a whistle. It was like tiny pieces of glass brushing together, soft, high-pitched, almost delicate. And it came from above me. I tilted my head back slowly. There was nothing in the sky, no plane, no drone, no bird, just a faint blur passing across the stars as if someone dragged translucent cloth overhead. It didn't block the stars exactly. It warped them, bent them slightly, like heat haze at night, but colder somehow. The shimmer passed directly over me, and all 8 streetlights flickered back to life at the same moment. The sudden brightness made me flinch. The lamps buzzed harder than usual, like they were waking up from sleep. For a few seconds, the entire block looked too bright, as if the bulbs were running beyond their normal power. The shimmering sound faded as whatever that was moved farther down the road. The blur above me drifted towards Cedar Avenue, distorting the sky as it went. When it reached the intersection, the traffic lights turned yellow. Not blinking, solid yellow. All 4 directions. Cars slowed awkwardly, unsure what to do. I watched one driver roll down his window like he was about to shout at someone. The blur hovered briefly above the crossing, or maybe it just moved slower there, and then continued east toward the river. As soon as it left the intersection, the traffic lights snapped back to normal red-green patterns. The street lamps behind it flickered again, but stayed on this time. I stood frozen for a while, unsure whether to keep walking or just go back to Matt's and make up some excuse to crash on his couch. Eventually, I forced myself forward, partly because standing alone under those lights felt worse than walking. I kept glancing up, even though the blur was gone from sight. Every time I passed under a lamp, I listened for the shimmer, but the only things I heard were distant cars and the rustle of leaves. When I reached the intersection, a man in a red hoodie was standing on the corner smoking. He kept looking up too, the same way I probably had been. When I passed, he said, "Did you see that?" I didn't answer. I didn't want to talk about it, not with a stranger. I crossed Cedar and continued toward my apartment. The closer I got to home, the more normal everything seemed. Dogs barking behind fences, a porch light flickering because someone hadn't replaced the bulb, the distant sound of a train. But every time I stepped under a street lamp, I waited for it to die. 3 blocks from home, the streetlights stayed steady, but the air changed again. The temperature dropped fast, like stepping into an air-conditioned room. I rubbed my arms, confused. I could see my breath for maybe 3 seconds before the air warmed back up, as if whatever passed overhead had left a cold trail hanging behind. I didn't hear the shimmer again, but the sudden cold felt like the same thing, just quieter. When I finally reached my building, I practically jogged up the stairs. My hands shook a little when I unlocked the door. Inside, the apartment felt too normal. My kitchen light humming its usual hum, the clock on the stove blinking 10:56 like nothing had happened. I stood by the window for a long time, watching the street. Nothing strange happened. No darkened lamps, no shimmering sky, no warped stars. Around midnight, I heard something faint outside. Not the shimmer, just a soft click as the streetlight in front of my building turned off for its scheduled cycle. It startled me anyway. I didn't sleep much. The next morning, I walked the exact same route to see if anything looked weird in daylight. Everything looked exactly as it should. The lamps intact, the intersection normal, the air a mild fall temperature. But halfway down Alder, where the last lamp had gone dark the night before, I found a patch of asphalt that looked polished. That's the only word I could think of. Not wet, not scraped. Polished. A smooth circle about 2 feet wide, like something had hovered just above it long enough to burnish the pavement. No one else seemed to notice it. Some days I walk through that block without thinking about it. Other days, especially when the air gets oddly still or when the lamps buzz a little louder than usual, I catch myself looking up, waiting for the sky to bend again, waiting for that faint shimmer to announce something drifting just overhead, invisible except for the way it snuffs out the light as it passes. I woke up to this faint white glow seeping through my curtains, the kind of soft light you get from snow reflecting a street lamp. Except it wasn't winter, and my apartment overlooked a backyard with one motion light that hadn't worked in months. For a minute, I just lay there trying to figure out the source. My bedroom clock said 3:41 a.m., and everything felt too still for that hour. At first, I thought maybe it was headlights from a car turning around in the alley, but the glow was too even. No movement, no shadows, just a steady, pale brightness pressing against the fabric like someone was holding a fluorescent panel outside my window. I sat up slowly, rubbing my face, and watched the glow. It didn't flicker, didn't get brighter or dimmer. It just existed, waiting. I don't know how long I stared before I finally swung my legs out of bed. The floor was cold. My throat felt dry in that way it does when you wake up too fast. My first instinct was to grab my phone, but the screen stayed black when I tapped it. Dead, even though I'd plugged it in before sleeping. I pulled the charger out and plugged it in again. Nothing. That made me hesitate. I stood there holding the dead phone in one hand and staring at the curtains. The glow made the edges of the fabric look almost translucent, but not enough to show the silhouettes of anything behind them. No shapes, no branches, no movement. Just light. I stepped closer. The air felt warmer near the window, very slightly, like the way it gets near an oven that's been off for a while but is still cooling down. Not enough to be uncomfortable. Just strange. When I reached out and grabbed the curtain edge, the glow brightened in a soft, swollen way, like whatever was behind it sensed the movement. My stomach tightened. I pulled the curtain back fast, and the light retreated. Not out, like it was shining from a fixed point. Up, straight upward, like someone yanked it by an invisible string. It stretched into a thin vertical smear of white and shot toward the top of the window frame, then vanished completely into the dark sky above. No flash, no sound, no fading. Gone. The yard outside was unlit, pitch black except for the faint outline of the fence catching a hint of ambient city glow. Nothing was illuminated. Not the grass, not the shed, not the power lines. It was like the light hadn't touched anything. My breath fogged the glass as I leaned closer. The backyard looked normal in that bleak, middle-of-the-night way. Trees still. No cats, no raccoons, no wind. Nothing to explain why the curtains had just looked like someone was shining a floodlight behind them. I opened the window a couple inches. Cold air slipped in, carrying the usual mix of damp leaves and distant car exhaust. I listened for engines, footsteps, talking. Anything. All I heard was a very faint hum from the highway half a mile away. I stuck my head out. The neighboring houses were dark. No one's porch lights were on. No motion lights had triggered. Even the street lamp at the end of the block seemed dimmer than normal. I waited a solid minute before closing the window again. My phone still wouldn't turn on. I pressed the power button until my thumb hurt. Nothing. I checked the hallway outside my room. The apartment was silent. My roommate Ryan's door was shut. His clock usually made this little whirring noise, an old flip-style thing, but I didn't hear it now. I walked over and pressed my ear to his door. Nothing. No snoring, no shifting. Just this thick quiet. I didn't want to wake him, so I went to the living room. The digital clock on the microwave was off. When I tried the light switch by the couch, the lamp didn't respond. Power outage, I thought, relieved for half a second, until I noticed the fridge humming. Only some things were off. I went back to my bedroom. The clock beside my bed was still glowing 3:41. I unplugged it. The numbers stayed lit for a second longer than they should have. 3, maybe 4 seconds, then blinked out. When I plugged it back in, the digits scrambled before settling on 12 like it had reset itself. I sat on the edge of the bed for a while, staring at the curtains. They looked normal now. Just cheap white curtains from Target, fluttering slightly from the draft I hadn't shut tight enough. The warm air around the window was gone. My room felt cold again. After what felt like 10 minutes, I finally crawled back under the blanket, though I didn't feel tired. Sleep felt like something that wasn't available anymore. I kept staring at the ceiling, replaying the exact moment the light shot upward. It didn't fade like a flashlight being pointed away. It didn't blink like someone switching something off. It moved, lifted, rapidly, almost smoothly, but without speed, blur, or streaks. Just a clean, vertical motion. At some point, I heard a soft tapping sound, not sharp like knuckles, more like something brushing lightly against the glass. I sat up fast and grabbed the curtain, pulling it aside. The backyard was dark. I held the curtain open for a full minute, barely breathing. No tapping followed, no glow, only a faint rustle from a distant tree. My phone finally vibrated, one single buzz, but the screen stayed black. I shook it, held the buttons, plugged and unplugged the charger again. Dead. I didn't fall asleep until the sky outside began to lighten. When I woke again around 9, my phone was charging normally at 87%. The microwave clock was blinking 12. And Ryan was in the kitchen making eggs like nothing had happened. He said the power must have flickered overnight. He hadn't noticed anything else. I looked out the window while I poured coffee. Daylight made everything look normal. Grass damp from dew, fence slats leaning at odd angles, a squirrel running along the power line. Nothing unusual. Except when I looked down at the windowsill, I saw a thin crescent-shaped mark on the paint. It wasn't a scratch, more like a pale line, wide as a fingertip, curved slightly as if something warm had pressed against it. I touched it. The paint wasn't warm. The line wasn't raised or indented. It looked almost like discoloration, but too precise to be from moisture. I checked Ryan's window. Nothing, just mine. The rest of the day felt normal enough that I talked myself out of making a big deal about it. But that night, when I drew the curtains closed, I caught myself glancing at them every few minutes, waiting for that faint white glow to gather behind them again, waiting to see if something would drift up the glass and vanish into the sky like it hadn't meant to be seen in the first place. Nothing happened. But around 2 in the morning, I woke up on my own for no reason. The curtains were dark, the room was still. And even though everything looked normal, I couldn't shake the sense that something had been there earlier, just long enough to notice me noticing it, before it pulled itself upward and out of sight. I first heard the humming around 11:20 p.m., a low vibration that seemed to come from everywhere at once. I was sitting on my couch scrolling through messages, half watching a documentary I'd already seen twice. At first, I thought it was an appliance, maybe the fridge kicking on, but it wasn't mechanical. It was softer, steadier, a kind of rhythmic hum, rising and falling so gradually it felt almost organic. I muted the TV. The sound stayed. I tried pinpointing it by walking through the living room. No change. I stepped into the kitchen. Same volume. It didn't get louder or quieter depending on where I moved inside the house. It just wrapped around everything. It was like being inside a large instrument someone was slowly tuning. I checked my phone. No notifications. The battery percentage flickered by a single digit, like it couldn't decide what number to show, but that happened sometimes when it got cold. I went to the window and pulled back the curtain slightly. The yard looked normal, at least in the vague way a yard at night looks normal. Dim porch light on the neighbor's garage, a few leaves scattered across the lawn, the street lamp at the end of the block flickering a little like it always did. But the sound wasn't coming from the street, or from the sky, or from the ground. It wasn't directional at all. I tried not to get worked up. Strange noises happen. Houses shift. Utilities hum. But something about the steadiness of it made me uneasy. You know how your brain tries to fit new sensations into categories you already understand? Mine had nothing to work with. The hum wasn't electrical, wasn't mechanical, wasn't human. I put my ear against the living room wall. No change. Basement door, same volume. Bathroom, same. It didn't get louder or softer based on proximity to anything solid. It just existed at a level that felt like it was coming through the air itself. A rhythmic rise and fall, slow, almost patterned, like breathing, except too even. I went back to the living room window, tried to listen carefully. My ears strained until they almost rang. The hum stayed perfectly steady. Something about that annoyed me more than scared me. I grabbed my coat, shoved my feet into my shoes, and headed for the front door. If something outside was making the noise, I wanted to see it instead of imagining shadows. The hum continued all the way to the entryway. Then literally the second, I twisted the knob and pulled the door open. The sound cut off, not faded, stopped, like someone flipped a switch. The silence hit so quickly it felt physical, like walking into a vacuum. The porch was still. No wind. No crickets. No passing cars. I stepped outside and looked around. The street was empty. A lone delivery truck rumbled 2 blocks away, but it didn't make the humming start again. No planes overhead, no transformer buzzing, no neighbor's heat pump running, just silence. I took a few steps into the yard, feeling foolish. I waited a long moment, letting the stillness settle. Nothing. I headed back inside. The door clicked shut behind me. 5 seconds later, the hum returned. Not gradually. Not like something spinning up, just there again. Same volume, same rhythm. I froze in the entryway. My first thought, stupid but automatic, was that someone was messing with me. But who would do that? And how? The hum didn't match anything a speaker could make, and it didn't vibrate the floor or walls. It wasn't directional enough to be something hidden inside. It was like the air inside the house was humming. I opened the door again. Instant silence. Closed it. Hum. I did it 4 more times because my brain refused to accept something so cleanly impossible. Hum. Silence. Hum. Silence. A perfect on-off response triggered by stepping over the threshold. I walked to the back door, wondering if maybe the front yard had something strange happening. Same thing. Inside. Hum. Outside. Silence. By now, the hairs on my arms were standing up. My chest felt tight in a way that wasn't fear exactly, just this deep discomfort, like my instincts were trying to warn me before the rest of my mind caught up. I turned on all the lights and walked room to room, trying to distract myself with normal tasks. Washed a couple dishes, picked up clutter. The hum didn't change, didn't get louder when I ran the sink, didn't react when I turned on the stove fan. It was too constant for that. At one point while I was in the hallway, the lights dimmed very slightly. Not flickering, just dipping like a brownout. The hum didn't change at all. When the lights brightened again, I checked my phone. The screen took a full second to wake up, which it never did before. Then the battery percentage started slipping, 62, 56, 49, before jumping back to 63. None of that made any sense. I turned airplane mode on. The hum didn't react. Around midnight, something new happened. The rhythm of the hum shifted, just one single cycle shorter than the others, like it skipped a beat. Not dramatically, but enough that I noticed instantly. Then it went right back to normal. I stood still in the hallway, listening hard. Another skip. Not at a regular interval, just once every few minutes. Each time it skipped, the air felt slightly heavier, like humidity increasing even though the house was dry. My ears felt full, like pressure was increasing or decreasing too subtly to measure. Around 12:30, the hum deepened by maybe half a tone. I'm not musical, but I swear the frequency changed. The sound grew just a tiny bit more resonant, like something adjusting itself. I'd reached the point where sitting still felt worse than moving, so I grabbed my keys and jacket. My plan was simple: open the door, step outside, and walk until I heard something normal again. But when I opened the front door, the hum still stopped instantly. And I mean instantly. The moment the latch let go, before the door even swung open, I stepped onto the porch. Silence. My ears rang from the sudden absence of sound. The street lamp flickered once and steadied. I walked a little down the sidewalk, my breath visible in the cold air. Nothing followed me. No hum, no weird pressure. The world was normal. But when I walked back and crossed through the doorway, the hum resumed as if it had just been waiting for me. This time, something else happened. The hallway light dimmed again for a moment. Not enough to go out, just a brief pulse. The air felt thick for a few seconds. The hum skipped again. I stood in the doorway, half inside, half outside, seeing if the sound would cut in and out depending on where I stood. It didn't. The line wasn't the threshold exactly, more like once the door was fully closed. Door cracked open. Silence. Door closed. Hum. I did not like that at all. Eventually I left the door open and sat on the porch with a blanket around my shoulders, just listening to the night. Normal night sounds came back: an occasional car, wind through branches, the rustle of a cat jumping onto a trash can. I kept glancing at the open doorway behind me. From outside, the house looked normal. Lights glowing softly, everything still. But the moment I stood and nudged the door halfway closed, I heard it. The faintest beginning of the hum. Like something inside was preparing to start up again. I opened the door wider. Silence. I didn't go back inside for another hour. I paced the yard, sat on the steps, kept zoning out, listening for anything unusual. Nothing happened. Nothing strange outside. But eventually, at around 2 a.m., I had to go back in. The cold was getting to me. The second I shut the door fully, the hum returned, in the exact same tone and rhythm as before, as if no time had passed. I barely slept. By morning, the noise was gone. The house sounded normal again. My phone charged fine. The lights didn't dim. Everything worked as if nothing had happened. But the next night, around 11:15, the hum started again. Softer this time, but undeniably the same sound. And when I checked, very slowly, by cracking the door open, silence. Closed, hum. I haven't figured out anything about it except one thing. Whatever is causing the humming doesn't want to be heard from the outside. Whatever it is, it only exists, only behaves that way when the house is closed up, fully sealed. I don't know why. But every night since, before I go to bed, I stand at the front door for a long time with my hand hovering over the knob, listening for that low, rhythmic sound that shouldn't be there. And every time I open the door, the silence on the other side feels a little too deliberate. The power went out sometime around 10:30 p.m. I'd been working on my laptop when the screen went black, and the whole house dropped into this heavy silence. No fridge hum, no heater kick on, just the dark and the quiet. At first I thought a breaker tripped, but the entire block looked out, street lamps dead, no porch lights, nothing coming from the neighbors' windows. I grabbed my phone and used it as a flashlight. Of course, the battery was low, 14%, because I'd forgotten to charge it. I tried the light switch a couple times, just out of habit. Nothing. For a while, I sat in the living room, unsure if I should wait it out or check outside. But something felt strange. Not just the quiet. The air in the house felt thick, almost like it does right before a thunderstorm, except there was no storm in the forecast. I cracked a window. Cool air poured in, sharper than it should have been for early June. That was when I noticed the vibration. Very faint, like the sensation you get standing near a big generator or a truck idling on the street. Except there were no trucks, no cars, no distant engines. It was like the air itself had a hum, not loud enough to hear, but strong enough that my skin picked it up. I went to the front door, hesitated a second, then stepped outside. The vibration grew stronger the moment the air hit me. Not painful, just noticeable, like the pressure was slightly wrong. My ears didn't pop, but they felt like they wanted to. The whole street was dark. Houses looked like hollow shapes. A few people several houses down were standing on their porches, talking quietly. No flashlights, no candles, just silhouettes. I walked down the steps to the sidewalk. The night felt colder than it should have. cold enough that I rubbed my arms. I'd only thrown on a t-shirt expecting summer air. Then I saw the light. It was faint, barely brighter than a star, drifting across the sky from west to east. Slow, too slow to be a meteor, and too smooth. No flicker, no sound, nothing trailing behind it. Just a steady, pale shape, gliding in a straight line, the way a boat moves across still water. I leaned forward slightly, watching it. My first thought was plane, but it wasn't blinking, and it wasn't shaped like one either. It wasn't really shaped like anything. It was almost spherical, or maybe oval, but hard to focus on. Every time I tried to pin down its outline, it seemed to blur just a little, like it didn't want to be seen clearly. The vibration in the air pulsed once, just a little stronger, when the light drifted directly overhead. I looked at my neighbor's house. Their dog, Baxter, usually a non-stop barker, was sitting silently at the edge of their yard, staring straight up. Not moving, not whining, just watching. I checked my phone to see if I could get a picture, but the screen wouldn't unlock. It lit up, then froze on the lock screen. The numbers on the clock glowed too brightly, almost washed out. I tried the buttons. Nothing responded. When I looked up again, the light had slowed. It hovered, or seemed to, not perfectly still, but almost. Like in order to stay in one place, it had to make tiny adjustments, small slides back and forth. Right, left, slide up, slide down. So small you'd miss them if you blinked. The vibration pushed a little harder. The air felt denser. Every hair on my arms lifted. I backed up a step, suddenly aware of how exposed I felt. The street was too quiet. Even the people on their porches seemed to have stopped talking. No one yelled or pointed or called attention to anything. It was like we were all waiting to see what it would do next. A small breeze moved through the neighborhood then, just enough to shift the leaves in the trees. Except it didn't feel like wind. It felt like the air was being pulled in one direction, then released. Not a natural gust, more like a push. A few leaves lifted off the ground and swirled upward in a slow spiral. They went higher than they should have, caught in a motion that didn't match the air around them. Then they drifted back down, as if someone lost interest. The light overhead dimmed slightly, then brightened. Not like a pulse, more like someone adjusting a dimmer switch. I felt my chest tighten. The vibrations sank deeper, almost into my bones. Not painful, just undeniable. "Do you see that?" a voice said behind me. It was Mrs. Carter from across the street, wearing a robe and slippers. Her eyes were fixed on the sky. I nodded, not looking away. "It's been doing that for a few minutes," she whispered, like speaking too loudly would matter. Another neighbor stepped outside, then another. The street slowly filled with people staring upward, all quiet, all still. The light finally moved again. It drifted eastward, gaining speed, not fast at first, but steady. Then smoother. The pressure eased just a hair with each foot of sky it crossed. Someone down the street muttered, "Satellite, maybe." But satellites don't change speed like that, and they don't make the air feel like it's vibrating through your ribs. The light picked up more speed. It wasn't dramatic, no streaking, no trail, but the acceleration was clear, smooth, controlled. Then it reached the edge of the neighborhood and brightened sharply. Not blinding, just a flare, a last glow that made the houses cast faint shadows, and then it dimmed to nothing. Gone. Not behind clouds, not dipped below the horizon, just gone. The pressure disappeared instantly. My ears popped. A dog barked somewhere. A car alarm chirped as if something brushed too close. The streetlights flickered back to life a moment later, one by one, like waking up. People looked around at each other, confused. No one said much. A couple neighbors walked back inside. Others stood around a while longer, staring at the sky like they were waiting for a second act. I stayed outside until the street was empty again. Inside, my phone finally unlocked. The clock had jumped ahead 9 minutes, even though the outage hadn't lasted that long. The battery percentage flickered between 13% and 6% twice before settling. The house felt normal again, warm, quiet, still. But later that night, when I lay in bed, the vibration came back for a single moment. A brief hum, like memory returning. My window rattled slightly, as if something passed overhead too high to see. When I looked outside, the sky was empty. But the air felt different, charged, waiting, like something had learned the outline of our neighborhood and hadn't completely left. The light changed to yellow just as I rolled up to the intersection, so I eased to a stop instead of speeding through. It was close to 9:15 p.m., early spring, warm enough that the windows were cracked to keep my old Honda from fogging. The streets were mostly empty, just a couple cars parked crooked along Maple, and the usual crowd from the Thai place closing up for the night. I wasn't thinking about anything serious, mostly just zoning out, waiting for the light to turn green so I could get home and microwave leftovers. Then I blinked, and when my eyes opened again, I noticed a small bright point hanging in the sky above the opposite street. I figured it was Venus at first, or maybe a plane on approach to the regional airport, but it was too low, too bright, and too fixed. It hovered maybe 20 or 30 degrees above the horizon, right above the roofline of an insurance office that always looked abandoned after dark. I blinked again. The point of light stayed exactly where it was. Same brightness, same position, not a millimeter of shift. I leaned forward a little, thinking maybe I was seeing a reflection on my windshield. I tilted my head, moved my hand to block the dashboard glare, even craned my neck slightly. The point didn't budge. It just hung there, white and small and stubborn. I checked the rearview mirror. The intersection behind me was normal. A lone cyclist pedaled across the grocery parking lot. A dog barked somewhere in the distance, and the street lamp above me flickered in that tired way old bulbs do. I looked back at the sky. Still there. Another blink. Still. I don't know how long I stared, waiting for it to drift like a plane or twinkle like a star. Anything. But it stayed perfectly still, like it was pinned to the sky. And every time I blinked, I had the same strange sensation that I was seeing it fresh, like it reappeared in place each time my eyes opened. The walk signal across the intersection switched to a steady orange hand. The traffic on the cross street thinned. Mine was about to turn green. I glanced down at my radio screen. The station name had vanished, replaced by a blank space. The time flickered between 9:14 and 9:18 twice before staying on 9:15. I tapped the screen. Nothing changed. A soft vibration trembled through the steering wheel, not from the engine, but something lighter, like a phone on silent mode somewhere under the dash. It lasted maybe 1 second, then stopped. I looked back up at the point of light. It pulsed, very faintly. Not a blink, just a slight brightening and dimming, almost like breathing. The stoplight clicked as it prepped to change. The sound made me jump. I realized my shoulders were tense, my hands gripping the wheel too tightly. I blinked again, slower this time. The point stayed. But this time something else happened. The air around the car felt thicker when I opened my eyes, like humidity rising suddenly even though the windshield wasn't fogged. My ears popped quietly. Not like altitude, more like pressure shifting in a closed room. The cross-traffic light turned yellow. I stared up at the point. My heartbeat thudded in my ears. And then the light turned green. Instantly. Literally the moment the green lit up, the point streaked upward. Not in an arc, not angled. Straight up. A white vertical line shot into the sky, gone so fast that my brain had to catch up. No trail left behind, no fade out. It was there for a frame of perception, and then it wasn't. My breath caught. I didn't move. A horn honked behind me. I jolted and finally hit the gas. The car rolled through the intersection slowly. My eyes darted between the road and the sky. Nothing but faint stars, no glow, nothing descending, nothing hiding behind clouds, just emptiness. At the next block, I pulled into the parking lot of the auto parts store and let the car idle. I shut the radio off entirely. The time on my dashboard read 9:12 now, which wasn't right. I'd gotten to the light after 9:15. I tapped it. It corrected itself to 9:17, then settled on 9:16. The vibration returned, a brief tremor through the wheel. I put the car in park and sat there, listening. The pavement radiated leftover heat through the windows. A teenager on a skateboard rolled past without noticing me. A muff slammed itself into the windshield. I leaned back and stared up through the windshield. Still nothing. Eventually I drove home, but the whole way I kept checking every patch of sky I could see between buildings. I tried to rationalize it, satellite catching sunlight, drone, aircraft turning, whatever, but nothing moved like that. Nothing hovered without drifting. Nothing streaked straight up in a perfect vertical. When I got home, I didn't go inside right away. I stood in the driveway staring at the space above the street, trying to spot the faintest glimmer. The porch light hummed behind me. Somewhere a sprinkler clicked on. I checked my phone. It lit up immediately, battery at 92%. No missed calls, no notifications, but the time read 9:13 for 3 seconds before jumping to 9:19. Inside, everything in my apartment looked normal. But when I turned on the kitchen light, it hesitated, one quick flicker, before stabilizing. Small enough that anyone else would have ignored it, but it felt connected somehow. I heated up leftover noodles I didn't taste. My hands shook when I set the bowl down. Later, I went back outside and sat on the front steps. Traffic was light. A couple joggers passed. A plane blinked across the eastern sky. Nothing unusual, except for one thing. When I blinked, even casually, I felt the faint urge to look at the same patch of sky where the point had hovered. Like my brain expected something to be there, a phantom instinct. I stayed out there until the chill got under my skin. Over the next few days, I tried not to think about it, but every night I'd step outside to get some air, which really meant scanning the sky for anything too still, too precise. Nothing ever showed up the same way. But sometimes I'd catch a star that looked slightly off, like it was trying too hard to look normal. And whenever I blinked, I'd feel that same strange sensation, like something might appear exactly where it had been before. A week later, I stopped at the same intersection on my way home. I stared at the spot above the insurance office. Normal stars, airplane lights in the distance. No hovering point. But when the light turned green, a faint pressure shift brushed against my ears like something rising far off, too fast and too high for me to see. I haven't stopped watching the sky at stoplights since. My blinks feel heavier now, like each one is a chance to catch something I wasn't meant to see, holding perfectly still, until the world moves again. I noticed something was wrong with Milo before I noticed anything in the sky. He'd been walking normally, sniffing trees, pulling toward every mailbox like it held state secrets, when he suddenly locked up. 1 second he was trotting ahead on the leash, the next he froze so abruptly I nearly stepped on him. It was a quiet night, colder than it looked. Early November in our suburb outside Eugene always had that damp chill, but this felt different, like the cold had weight. Streetlights cast dull yellow pools on the sidewalk, and everything in between was dark enough that I could barely see my breath. "Milo," I said, giving the leash a gentle tug. "Come on." He didn't budge. His ears weren't perked. His tail wasn't wagging or tucked. He was just fixed. Head angled up, body rigid, front paws planted stubbornly. The leash shook slightly in my hand because he was trembling. Not scared trembling, but something sharper, like he was bracing against a sound I couldn't hear. I followed his gaze. At first, I didn't see anything except the usual smattering of stars and a couple of faint clouds drifting overhead, but Milo kept staring, so I kept looking. Then I saw it. A shadow. A shape moving across the sky, not blocking stars outright, but dimming them, like someone pulling sheer fabric across a flashlight. It glided so slowly I thought maybe my eyes were tricking me, like I was imagining movement where there wasn't any. The shape had no lights, no outline, just a faint distortion, a dark patch against the night that drifted silently from west to east. I squinted. The stars behind it didn't disappear. They warped, shifted slightly, like their positions were bending through a lens. The shadow was the size of a plane, maybe bigger, but it didn't move like one. No noise, no blinking lights, no change in speed, just a smooth, steady glide. Milo whimpered softly. I'd never heard that exact sound from him before, not fear, not alertness. More like acknowledgement. I swallowed and took a step backward without meaning to. My shoe scraped against the pavement, unnaturally loud in the stillness. The shadow didn't react. It kept drifting. But the air around us changed. Not colder, not warmer. Just pushed, like a small, silent shift in pressure. My ears tingled. Milo pressed himself against my leg, still staring up. "Okay," I said quietly. "Okay, buddy." I wasn't saying it to him. The shadow slid over a break in the trees where the sky opened wider. Without the branches interrupting it, I could see it more clearly. Not a craft, not a bird, not a cloud. It was a moving absence, an oval or maybe elongated shape with edges so soft they blurred into the night. The stars at its center dimmed, but didn't vanish, like something transparent but dense was passing over them. The subtle warping reminded me of heat rising off pavement, but frozen, cold, controlled. A wind stirred behind me, though the leaves across the street stayed still. It was the wrong direction, the wrong temperature, and lasted too long to be natural. Milo leaned harder into me, nails clicking on the sidewalk. The shape passed almost directly overhead. Everything got quieter. No distant traffic, no hum of porch lights, no rustling leaves. The silence thickened until I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. Then the dogs in the neighborhood started barking, not all at once, just one at first, far away. Then another, then two more. The barks overlapped, scattered across blocks, not panicked but insistent. Animals warning each other in a way humans never quite pick up on. Milo didn't bark, he just watched. The shadow started to rise, not abruptly but gradually, like it was losing interest in the ground. It drifted higher, and as it did, the stars behind it straightened, the distortion eased, the pressure in my ears faded, but the shape didn't get smaller like something flying away. It just thinned. The darkness softened. The space it occupied dissolved into the rest of the sky until there was nothing left to track. The barking in the neighborhood faded one by one. Milo finally blinked, then shook himself from head to tail like he'd just come out of cold water. He looked at me, eyes wide, waiting for me to do something. I didn't know what that something was. "Let's go home," I said, barely over a whisper. He didn't hesitate. He turned and pulled hard on the leash, eager to get moving again. We walked fast, too fast. I kept checking the sky, even though I couldn't see much between the trees. Every shadow felt deeper. Every porch light hum felt too sharp. Every quiet stretch of sidewalk felt like it was waiting. Halfway home, Milo stopped again, this time only for a second, glancing up at another patch of sky before continuing. I looked up too. Nothing. Just a thin cloud sliding past the moon. Inside the house, Milo paced for a minute before settling by the front door, ears perked. I stood there with the leash still in my hand, staring through the blinds. The sky looked normal. The stars were steady. But I could have sworn that a faint ripple passed across them for just a moment. Not drifting like a cloud, not blinking like a plane, just a slight tightening of the space between two stars, then relaxing again. Milo saw it too. His head tilted. I turned off the porch light. I don't know why. Instinct, maybe. As the darkness settled, the house finally felt like a shield instead of a box of windows. Milo eventually curled up next to the couch, but he didn't take his eyes off the front door for a long time. And even when he finally fell asleep, I stayed awake, listening for any shift in pressure, any silence too thick, any sign that something was passing overhead again. Something so quiet and so deliberate that only a dog would notice first, and only after that would the sky remember to show the shape gliding across its face. The fog was already thick when I turned onto Bayless Street, so dense it looked like it was pressing down on the rooftops instead of drifting. I'd been out later than I meant to. Dinner with a coworker ran long, and by the time I started walking home, the streetlights were just hazy orange smudges, barely lighting more than a few feet ahead. I don't usually walk that route. It's quieter, almost too quiet at night, with long lines of old bungalows and narrow yards. That night it felt even more closed in, like the fog was swallowing up sound as well as light. My footsteps felt muffled. Even the distant traffic on the main road sounded far away. I was halfway down the block when I saw the lights. At first it looked like a faint glow above one of the houses. Not a beam, not a spotlight, just a soft cluster of points barely visible through the fog. My brain tried to fit it into something normal. Christmas lights? Security floodlights? A drone? But the lights weren't stationary, they were moving. Not flying, exactly, more like drifting. A group of maybe 6 or 7 small, pale points gliding together in this slow, coordinated rhythm just above the roofline across the street. It reminded me of fish swimming in formation, changing direction with subtle shifts I didn't fully see. They weren't bright enough to cast light on anything, not even the fog around them. They were just there, suspended in that heavy gray air. I stopped walking without realizing it. The light slid left, then curved upward slightly. They dipped again, sliding behind a tree's silhouette, then reappeared on the other side. I blinked hard, thinking I was seeing reflections from cars or street lamps, but there were no cars, and the nearest working lamp was behind me, barely hanging on through the fog. The cluster drifted closer, not toward me, but toward the center of the street, like it was inspecting the row of houses. The movement was too smooth for anything mechanical. No stutter, no wobble, no flicker, just controlled, silent motion. The hairs on my neck lifted. I took one small step backward. The lights paused. They didn't grow brighter, didn't act like they noticed me. But the pause itself felt wrong, like something had nudged a gear out of alignment. Then they shifted formation. The points drew closer together, almost touching, then spread out again in a pattern that didn't feel random. Not a shape I recognized, just something deliberate, coordinated. I whispered, "What the hell?" without meaning to. My voice sounded like it got swallowed by the fog the second it left my mouth. The lights began drifting in my direction, slowly. Not like they were honing in on me, but like they'd simply chosen a path that happened to lead down the street I was standing in. But with the fog low and the houses dark, there was nowhere I could go without crossing directly into their path. I stepped behind a parked sedan, crouching slightly. My heart hammered so hard I felt it in my jaw. I peeked over the roof of the car. The lights floated to the center of the street and hovered there, not fully stopping. Tiny adjustments kept happening, little slides and dips, but holding a general position. One of the lights drifted lower than the others, as if scanning the fog beneath it. Then it rose again and rejoined the group. The cluster tilted, changing orientation in a way that didn't match gravity or perspective. It wasn't rotating like an object. It was more like the entire formation had reframed itself in space, each point maintaining its relation to the others, while the whole thing angled smoothly. My breath turned shallow. I realized I was squeezing the edge of the car door so hard my knuckles hurt. A new sound entered the air. Not a hum, not a buzzing, but a faint pressure shift feeling in my ears, like when you drive through a long tunnel. It wasn't loud, but it felt physical, like the air density changed for a moment. The lights slowly rose higher, as if preparing to go above the fog layer. I watched, barely blinking. Then the fog thinned, just a small breath of wind, a slight parting, and for a second I saw the sky clearly above the cluster. Nothing was there. Not the lights, not a silhouette, not a craft, just empty air. The fog closed again almost immediately, and the lights reappeared. But farther down the street, as if the brief clarity had reset their position. They drifted quietly over the next block, moving with that same synchronized glide, then softened into the fog until I couldn't tell if they'd vanished or simply gotten too far away to see. The air pressure eased in my ears. The night noise returned faintly. A dog barked a few streets over. I stayed behind the parked car for at least another minute, waiting for any sign they might return. Nothing did. Slowly, I stood up and rubbed my hands together to get feeling back. Every house on the block looked normal, dim, quiet, fog-blurred. My own breath felt too loud. I walked the rest of the way home fast, checking behind me every few steps. The fog swallowed everything. I didn't see any more lights. Inside my apartment, I locked the door twice and stood at the window staring out at the street. Fog pressed against the glass, street lamp halos wobbling softly in it. Nothing unusual. But when the fog shifted, I kept expecting to see a cluster of pale points sliding through it, drifting low over the rooftops, moving with that too smooth rhythm. I didn't sleep much. In the morning, the fog was gone. The air was bright and ordinary. But later that afternoon, when I walked past the same block to prove to myself it had been nothing special, the quiet felt different. Like the street remembered something, even if I tried not to. Every now and then, when the weather turns damp and the fog creeps low, I catch myself watching the tops of houses for any sign of light moving in ways light shouldn't, always waiting to see if a cluster will drift into view again, synchronized like something alive behind the gray. I heard the chirping on a Thursday night, sometime after 9 p.m., while I was sitting on the back patio with a beer. It had been a long day, and the temperature had finally dropped enough that the air felt reasonable again. One of those warm Colorado summer nights where the breeze is barely there, just enough to move the wind chimes now and then. I usually sat outside for a bit before bed to decompress. That night felt normal at first. The sound came while I was halfway through my drink, soft, rhythmic, and too regular to be an insect. It wasn't a bird either. Birds don't chirp like that at night, and they definitely don't chirp in perfect pulses. It was faint, almost shy, but still distinct enough that I heard it over the hum of the swamp cooler through the screen door. Chirp, 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 about one per second. Clean, mechanical almost. I tilted my head a little, listening harder. It seemed to be coming from above, not from the yard, not the roof, higher than that. When I looked up, the sound stopped immediately, like someone hit pause. The sky was clear, typical dry summer night. Stars everywhere, the Milky Way a faint smear overhead. Nothing moved, no planes, no satellites, no clouds, just black sky and cold pinpoints of light. I waited a few seconds, still staring upward. Nothing. When I finally looked back down at my beer, the chirping returned, same rhythm. Same pitch, almost exactly where it had been before. I looked up again. It stopped. I tested it a few times, trying not to freak myself out. Look down, chirp. Look up, silence. Look down, chirp. Up, silence. It was too consistent to be a coincidence. Eventually, I kept my head angled downward, but shifted my eyes upward without moving too much. The chirping faltered, not a full stop, but a stutter, like it was reacting to my attention, even if I wasn't fully looking at it. When I lifted my chin by even an inch, the sound cut off. That was when my skin prickled. Not fear at first, just confusion that made me suddenly aware of how alone I was outside. I stood up slowly, trying not to crunch the gravel too loudly. I walked out into the middle of the yard where the patio light didn't reach as well. My eyes adjusted to the dark. The chirping didn't return yet. I waited. 5 seconds. 10. Then, chirp, chirp, chirp. I didn't look up this time. I kept my eyes level with the fence. The sound seemed to be coming from maybe 40 or 50 feet above me. Too high for a bug on the roof, too low for a plane, too steady for anything I could explain. It wasn't echoing off the houses. It didn't sound like something far away. It was overhead, directly. I took another step into the grass. The pulsing got slightly louder. Not by much, but enough that I could tell I'd moved closer to it. I finally whispered, "What is that?" Because hearing my own voice grounded me a little. The sound stopped again. Not faded. Stopped. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears then. The neighborhood around me was dead quiet. No dogs barking, no cars on the main road a block over, not even crickets. It was so still that it felt like the entire world was holding its breath. I backed up until I felt the patio concrete under my feet again. When I reached my chair, I sat down, gripping the armrests. Chirp. I jumped slightly at how sudden it was. Chirp, chirp. I stared straight ahead, letting my eyes relax, letting my peripheral vision widen. Sometimes you can catch movement that way better than looking straight at something. For a second, just a second, I thought I saw something darker than the sky shift above me. Not a shape, more like a patch where the stars didn't match up, like one or two of them were slightly displaced. I blinked hard. The patch was gone. The chirping continued. I tried to see if the sound had a direction. I rotated my head a little. It stayed above. I crouched down. It stayed above. I leaned back in my chair and stared at my knees. Louder. I exhaled shakily and put the beer on the ground. My hands were trembling now, and I didn't want to spill it. I forced myself to stand again and walk to the far end of the yard, near the fence. The chirping stayed with me. Not directly overhead every step, but shifting just slightly to stay aligned above me. Like it was tracking me, not from a distance, but from a fixed height, straight up. At one point, the chirping paused, and the silence got so deep, it almost rang in my ears. Then a softer, lower pulse joined it, like a second voice humming from above, slower and stretched out. I looked up without thinking. Silence again. I couldn't see anything. My eyes darted from cluster to cluster of stars, searching for any sign, motion, shape, anything. Nothing. I backed away from the fence and started walking toward the house. I didn't run, but I didn't stroll either. The chirping picked up again when my gaze dropped. Shorter intervals now. Chirp, 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 chirp. It reminded me of sonar pings. When I reached the porch, I hesitated. The porch light created a cone of brightness that felt suddenly unsafe, like stepping into it would make me visible in a way I didn't want to be. But the dark yard felt worse. I stepped into the light anyway. The chirping slowed. I placed my hand on the doorknob. The chirping stopped. I waited. After 5 long seconds, a single chirp sounded. Loudest yet. Not painfully loud, but sharp. Intentional. I turned the knob quickly and slipped inside, shutting the door behind me. I locked it without thinking and stood in the entryway with the lights off, listening. Nothing. Not even the refrigerator hum. I cracked the blinds just a sliver and peeked outside. The yard looked normal again. Streetlight down the block flickered faintly like always. Nothing overhead. No movement. I watched for 2 full minutes, hardly breathing. Still nothing. When I finally flicked on a lamp, the normal house sounds returned. The fridge humming, the swamp cooler rumbling, the faint chirp of a smoke detector battery dying somewhere down the street. I sat on the couch and stayed there until almost midnight, too keyed up to move, staring at the back door as though it might open on its own. Eventually, exhaustion won. When I went to bed, I left the blinds closed and the lamp on low. Just before I drifted off, I heard one faint chirp from outside. Not overhead, off to the right, east of the house. Distant, almost shy. Like whatever it was had drifted away but hadn't gone far. I didn't get up. I just lay there staring at the ceiling, imagining the sky above the neighborhood lamp, wondering if something was passing over the houses the same way it had passed over mine. Pausing each time someone looked up, pulsing softly in the dark, continuing only when no one was paying direct attention. For days afterward, every time I sat outside, I caught myself listening hard for that pulsing sound. Some nights I heard normal noises, wind, insects, cars on the road. Other nights, the silence got thick again, too evenly quiet, and I'd go back inside after a few minutes, so the heart picking up speed. I haven't heard the chirping again the way I did that first night. Not clearly, not close, but every once in a while, right as I'm looking away from the stars, I think I hear the beginning of it, just one pulse, before the night swallows it, like something paused again mid-motion, waiting for me to look up so it could disappear. I noticed the shadow first, not the darkness around it. I was driving home from my sister Erin's place, taking County Road 12 because the highway was closed for construction. It was close to 10 p.m., moonless, the kind of rural Colorado night where the dark feels heavier than the air. My headlights cut a narrow tunnel through it, everything else swallowed up. About 10 minutes into the drive, the road straightened out into a long, empty stretch. I glanced at the asphalt ahead and saw my shadow stretching across it, not a faint, soft-edged one like you sometimes get when the moon is low. This was solid, sharp, like high-beam headlights shining right behind my car, except there were no cars behind me. I checked the rearview mirror, nothing but black. I flipped the mirror up and down a few times, convinced maybe it had gotten knocked out of alignment. But the reflection was the same, empty road. I eased my foot off the gas. The shadow stretched farther. It elongated across the asphalt, long enough to reach beyond the beam of my headlights, which shouldn't have been possible. Headlights don't make shadows in front of the car. Something behind me was lighting the road. I rolled the window down an inch. Cold air rushed in, smelling like dust and dry grass, but I didn't hear anything. No engine, no tires, no rushing air that would come with a tailgating truck. I slowed from 50 to 40. The shadow grew longer. I sped back up. The shadow shortened, but only a little. I turned my interior lights on for a second to steady myself, then turned them off again. When the darkness settled back into place, I felt like the world had narrowed, like my car existed in a pocket of space cut off from the rest. My hands felt slick on the steering wheel. 3 miles from the turnoff to my neighborhood, the shadow started shifting. It leaned slightly left, then centered itself again, then right. Not wildly, just drifting like something behind me was moving back and forth, but there was still nothing back there. My mirror insisted on that. The road dipped gently, and for a moment the shadow slid up over the small hill ahead before I reached it, stretched thin and distorted like someone had grabbed its edges and pulled. I flicked my high beams on and off. No change. At the next slight curve, I decided to test it. I switched lanes, drifting to the left side of the empty 2-lane road. My shadow followed my movement perfectly, like it was locked to the center of my car. I whispered, "Okay, okay," just to hear another voice. The shadow wasn't just mine, though. Not exactly. My outline was there. Head, shoulders, shape of the car. But something at the back end of it didn't match. A faint bulge near the trunk line. A distortion. Like the shadow of something hovering just above and behind me, too faint to define but too solid to ignore. I pushed the gas to 60. The shadow didn't fall behind. It stayed exactly where it was, stretched long and wrong across the road ahead. My chest tightened. I kept checking the mirror, even though the view didn't change. Pure blackness. No headlights, no car silhouette, nothing. The road climbed slightly, and when I reached the top, I saw another stretch of asphalt spill out in front of me, a long, straight section with no trees or anything to break the line. My shadow reached the end of that section. Then it seemed to bend upward slightly, like the road itself was tilting even though I knew it was flat. A low vibration hummed through the car, not through the engine, not through the radio, but through the air itself. My ears felt full, pressurized, like driving into higher altitude too quickly. I tapped my ear. It didn't pop. The hum grew stronger for a moment. My rearview mirror vibrated faintly. Then the road behind me lit up. Not with headlights. It wasn't warm light. It was cold, pale, almost bluish, though it didn't illuminate anything except the far edges of the mirror. The road surface behind my car glowed faintly, but not the fences or fields beside it, just the asphalt like it was reacting instead of being lit. The shadow ahead snapped sharper, like someone had increased the contrast. I felt the urge to slam on the brakes. I didn't. I kept a steady 55, hands locked on the wheel. Then the hum cut out. Instantly. Not fading, just gone. And so was the glow behind me. My shadow shrank fast, pulling back toward the front of my car, like an elastic band snapping back into shape. Within a second or two, it looked normal, dim, soft-edged, barely visible. I exhaled shakily, but I didn't relax. Something still felt off. Half a mile later, my headlights flickered. Just a blink. Maybe half a second. I lifted my foot off the gas. The headlights flickered again, this time longer. And in that brief dimness, the world outside seemed too still, like every sound had been sucked out of the air. When the lights brightened again, I saw something ahead, just for a flash. Not the shadow this time, something above the road. A darker patch of darkness, moving upward, like something had been riding just above my car and was now rising straight into the sky. I craned my neck to follow it, but it blended too quickly into the night. The stars wavered slightly where it disappeared, like ripples across water. When I pulled onto my street, the world returned to its normal suburban quiet. Porch lights glowing, sprinklers ticking on timers, and occasional television flickering behind living room curtains. I parked in my driveway and sat there for a long minute, gripping the steering wheel, waiting for the hum, or the vibration, or the glow to return. Nothing did. But when I finally got out and shut the door, I noticed something on the road beside my car. A narrow strip of asphalt, just a few feet long, looked lighter than the rest, as if something bright had hovered close to it recently. Not burned, not melted, just faintly bleached, like the pavement had been exposed to light in a way it wasn't built for. I crouched and touched it. Warm. Just barely, but unmistakably warm. The rest of the asphalt was cold. I stood up fast. Inside the house, my shadow looked normal under the hallway light, but when I walked into my bedroom and turned off the lamp, I froze. For a second. Just a second. My silhouette on the opposite wall stretched longer than it should have. Not much. Maybe a foot. Maybe two. Then it snapped back as if nothing had happened. I didn't sleep for a while. Since then, every time I drive that stretch of County Road 12, I keep checking the mirror, scrolling the darkness behind me for any sign of pale light. And whenever my headlights catch my shadow ahead, even in the most normal way, I brace myself, expecting it to stretch into that impossible shape again, pulled by something I never heard, never saw, but somehow know was there. I was on my way back from a late shift, heading north on Highway 27, the stretch that runs along the edge of town where the streetlights thin out and the trees start crowding the shoulders. It was close to 11:45 p.m., cold enough that the windshield kept fogging at the corners, and the sky was one of those low-cloud nights where the clouds look heavy but never actually rain. Traffic wasn't bad, just the usual handful of cars from people getting off work around the same time. There was a silver Subaru in front of me, a dark SUV behind me, and a couple of cars in the oncoming lane. Nothing unusual. I wasn't tired exactly, but I was zoning out, doing that thing where you drive on autopilot while thinking about something else. I remember adjusting the heater, checking the dashboard clock, and looking at the glow from a gas station sign 2 miles ahead. Then, all at once, every car around me slowed down, not slammed on their brakes, not drifted gradually. They all just slowed, at exactly the same moment, almost like a synchronized cue. The Subaru's brake lights came on. The SUV behind me dipped back. Even the cars in the oncoming lane visibly decelerated. I instinctively hit my brakes too, not wanting to rear-end anybody. The weird part was how uniform it was. Every car doing the same thing at the same time, as if we were all reacting to something none of us could actually see yet. I leaned forward, trying to see past the Subaru. At first I thought maybe a deer had wandered into the road. It happens all the time here. But the road ahead looked empty. No animals, no stalled cars, no patrol lights. Then the air changed. I can't describe it perfectly. The sound inside the car went flat, like someone sucked the depth out of it. The hum of the engine felt muted. My ears had a slight pressure, like driving into a valley too fast. Even the headlights on the road looked duller, like the pavement wasn't reflecting them properly. The Subaru in front of me slowed more, almost to a crawl. That's when I saw it. A dim orb, maybe the size of a basketball, maybe a little bigger, hovered above the road about 100 feet ahead. It wasn't bright, not glowing like a flashlight or a lamp. It was more like a soft, muted sphere of pale light, almost grayish white, just hanging there above the asphalt. It didn't flicker. It didn't pulse. It just hovered, still and quiet, as if it was observing something, or deciding something. My first thought was some kind of drone, but there were no blinking navigation lights, no sound, no propellers visible, and the light wasn't shining outward. It was contained within itself, like it wasn't illuminating the surrounding air at all. I realized I'd taken my foot off the brake without meaning to. The car had rolled a couple feet forward. So had the others. The orb hung there for maybe half a second, long enough for every detail to burn itself into my memory. But then it moved. Not sideways, not forward, straight up. It shot upward so fast it didn't blur. It just disappeared. A streak of white swallowed by the dark underbelly of the clouds. No trail left behind, no sound, no shift of air. It was like it punched a hole through the sky and the clouds closed up instantly. The second it vanished, everything changed back. The pressure in my ears released. The pavement reflected the headlights normally again. The hum of the engine returned to normal volume. The cars around me began accelerating one by one, as if a collective instinct had told us it was safe to move. The Subaru sped up. The SUV behind me kept a generous distance, but followed. Even the oncoming cars picked up speed. It was as if we'd all experienced something at the same time, but none of us wanted to acknowledge it. I drove another mile before I realized my hands were shaking. At the gas station ahead, the Subaru pulled in sharply. I thought about stopping too, maybe saying something casual like, "Did you see that thing back there?" But the idea of talking about it made my stomach twist. I kept driving. I turned off the highway onto the residential roads. Everything looked normal. Porch lights glowing, holiday decorations still up on a few houses, a cat sitting on someone's front steps. But the weirdness wasn't done yet. At the light near my neighborhood, the radio cut out. Not turned off, cut out. The music stopped mid-beat and was replaced by what sounded like faint static, or maybe air rushing through a small space. I tapped the screen. It didn't respond. The clock display froze. Then, after maybe 3 seconds, everything resumed like nothing happened. When I reached my house, I sat in the parked car for a while, staring at the quiet street. Part of me expected to see another orb hanging above the rooftops, or a streak of motion through the clouds. But the sky was just low and gray and still. Inside, the house felt colder than usual. I went straight to the kitchen and leaned on the counter, trying to steady myself. My phone buzzed with a weather alert, fog advisory after midnight, but that felt unrelated. Eventually, I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw that orb again, dim, contained, silent, hovering like it was thinking. The next morning, I half expected to see something on the news, reports of lights over the highway, multiple drivers slowing at once, weird radar blips, but there was nothing, just normal local stories and the usual weather chatter. I drove that same stretch of highway again 2 days later just to see if anything felt strange. It didn't. Everything looked exactly the same. Same trees, same guardrails, same cracks in the asphalt. But when I passed the spot where the orb had hovered, my ears popped again. Too subtle to be a coincidence. Too quick for me to fully react before it was gone. Even now, when I drive at night and the traffic around me suddenly slows or falls into the same rhythm, my heart lurches. I watch the road like something might drift into view again. Something small, quiet, thinking. Something waiting for the right moment to appear for less than a second, and then shoot back into the clouds. I was out on Lake Norrin before sunrise, which was normal for me on weekends. The place was quiet that early. No jet skis, no kids yelling from docks, no motorboats ripping through the middle, just a wide sheet of still water and the occasional loon calling across it. The sky was a pale gray blue, one of those mornings where the light feels soft and tired, like it hasn't fully committed to being daytime yet. I'd launched from the public access ramp on the north end and rode out maybe 100 yards and let myself drift. My buddy Mark was supposed to join me, but he overslept and texted at the last second, saying he'd catch up later. I didn't mind being alone. Fishing was one of the few times I didn't feel pressure to talk. The lake was calm, almost too calm. No wind at all. Even the mosquitoes hadn't come out yet. The surface looked like smooth glass. I cast once, reeled in slow. Nothing. Cast again. Let it sink. The line barely rippled the water. About 10 minutes in, I noticed something strange off to my right. At first, I thought it was a reflection from a cabin window, or maybe a flashlight from one of the early morning kayakers. But there weren't any kayakers, and the cabins on that side were all dark. It was a straight line of light, thin, white, perfectly horizontal, skimming across the surface of the water. Not dancing like moonlight, not shimmering, just sliding. It moved slow, maybe 2 or 3 inches per second, cutting across the lake in a smooth, ruler-straight path. It wasn't wide, maybe the width of a pencil, but it was bright enough that it broke the reflection of the trees like something had drawn a line through them. I frowned and looked behind me, thinking maybe the rising sun was coming through the trees in some weird way. But behind me was nothing but dark shoreline and thick pine. No sun yet, no windows, no boats. When I turned back, the line of light was closer. Not dramatically, just enough that I realized it was moving toward me, not just across. I put my hand over my eyes to block any glare. Didn't help. It wasn't glare, it was too precise for that. I tried to see what was causing it. I expected to find something obvious, maybe a drone overhead or a fisherman with a headlamp on a dock I hadn't noticed, but when I looked up, the sky was empty. Gray, quiet, flat sky. Not even birds flying. No clouds thick enough to refract anything. Just space. I looked back down, the line kept coming, steady and quiet, cutting a path like a laser across the water. I leaned out of the boat to see if maybe something under the surface was reflecting light upward, but the water was dark. Still. Empty. My fishing line twitched, not from a fish, just a subtle tug, like something under the boat had brushed against it. The water around me rippled once. Small circle. Too smooth. I reeled in slowly, not taking my eyes off the line, now gliding within 20 feet of the boat. As it drew closer, the water beneath it seemed slightly unsettled. Like the line wasn't just reflecting light, it was interacting somehow. The surface around it tightened, forming a faint ridge, barely noticeable unless you stared. I stared. The ridge followed the line exactly. Where it went, the water shifted, like the skin of the lake was reacting. When the line got within 10 feet, everything around me got quieter. Even the tiny slap of my boat against the water stopped. The silence felt thick, like sound wasn't traveling right. I sat completely still. The line slid closer. It reached 5 feet. I could see the reflection of my own boat distorted along it, like the water was warping slightly. I leaned back, instinct telling me not to lean too close. Then it stopped. Completely. The line of light froze in place on the water's surface, still bright, still perfect. I held my breath. Nothing else moved. Not the water, not the trees, not the air. I checked the sky again, empty. When I looked down, the line was gone. Not faded, not broken up by a ripple. 1 second it was there, sharp and clear, and the next the water was just water. Flat and dull and blank. I blinked hard, looked again, still nothing. The silence hung for a few beats too long. Then the world snapped back, wind rustling the pines, a loon calling in the distance, the soft lap of water against the hull. It all came back in a messy rush, like someone unmuted a soundtrack. I let out a shaky breath I didn't realize I was holding. My hands felt weird, tingly, like I'd been gripping something too tightly. I steadied the oars and rowed a few strokes, just enough to move away from the spot where the line had stopped. The water rippled normally as I moved. Nothing followed me. When I reached a different part of the lake, I forced myself to cast again. Habit more than desire. The line arced out, landed, sank. Everything looked normal. 10 minutes later, Mark texted that he was heading down. I didn't tell him anything about what I saw. I wasn't sure how to even start describing it. A straight line of light slid across the lake toward me with no source. Didn't sound like something a reasonable adult says. I rowed back toward the launch, trying to keep my eyes off the surface, because every time I let myself look too long, I thought I saw faint straightness here and there. Maybe waves, maybe tricks of the light, or maybe something else. Mark met me at the shoreline carrying his gear and a thermos. He said something about traffic being worse than expected, asked if I'd caught anything, normal stuff. I answered on autopilot. Before we pushed off again, he nodded toward the middle of the lake and said, "Water looks weird today. You see that?" I looked where he was pointing. Just sunlight on ripples. Totally ordinary. But for a split second, and only because I was looking for it, I saw the faintest suggestion of a line, far away, thin as thread, gone almost instantly. I pretended I hadn't noticed. All day while we fished, I kept glancing at every reflection at the corner of my eye, trees, clouds, boat wake, waiting for something to straighten into an impossible shape again. It didn't. Not clearly. But when the sun started setting and we rowed back, the water around us briefly tightened in one thin, perfect strip, running parallel to the boat. Mark didn't see it. He was talking about his new job, not looking at the water. The line faded before I could say anything. I didn't mention it. I just rowed a little faster, watching the lake shift around us, wondering if something under or over it was watching the surface as closely as I was. I was sitting by Lake Brenton just after sunset, the kind of evening where the air hangs in place and everything feels a little muted. It had been a hot day and the ground was still giving off warmth, even though the sky had gone that deep blue-gray that comes right before full dark. I'd driven out there after work to clear my head, parked at the small public access area, and walked down to the shore with a folding chair and a cheap insulated bottle my sister gave me for my birthday. There wasn't anyone else around. It was a Tuesday, and most people didn't bother coming to that side of the lake anyway. The nicer trails and picnic areas were across the water, where the road was paved and the cell service didn't drop out. On my side, the trees grew tight. The dirt lot had potholes you could lose a tire in, and the lake smelled a little like algae. But it was quiet, and I liked that. I'd been sitting maybe 20 minutes, listening to insects, watching a few late kayakers paddle their way back toward the far dock. The sky was almost black now, except for a faint band of lighter blue on the horizon. I remember thinking the lake looked unusually still for summer. No breeze, no boat wakes, not even the occasional plunk of fish coming up for bugs. I was scrolling absent-mindedly on my phone when I heard the first sound. Not a splash. More like a soft, dull whump, almost like a hand slapping the surface from underneath. I looked up fast, expecting to see a fish jump or a turtle poke its head up. But the water was calm. Then a ripple formed about 30 feet out. Normally when something disturbs the lake, you get messy rings that spread unevenly. But this one was clean. A perfect circle, growing outward like someone dropped a stone dead center, but without the splash. The middle didn't bubble, didn't dip. It just pulsed slightly, then the ring widened. I stood up out of reflex. It was too perfect to be natural, too even. I took a few steps closer to the edge, trying to see if something was rising under the surface. But the lake was dark, almost mirror-like. Nothing moved below. The ripple expanded until it faded into the rest of the water. Then another one formed in the exact same spot. This one was slower, more deliberate. The center trembled just a tiny bit like the surface was vibrating. That's when the light appeared. It showed up above the lake, maybe 100 feet in the air, barely brighter than a dying ember. A dim red glow, round but not sharply outlined. It pulsed soft, slow beats, the way a distant radio tower sometimes looks through fog, except there wasn't any fog and there weren't any towers anywhere near Lake Brenton. I froze with one foot in the damp sand. The red light brightened slightly, then dimmed again. Each pulse lined up almost perfectly with the ring forming in the water. Light, ripple, light, ripple, like they were connected. I glanced behind me, half expecting to see headlights from a new arrival, or maybe a drone operator messing around. But the dirt lot was empty, except for my car, and the trees on either side stood thick and dark. I tried to listen for a hum, Drones have that high whine, but the only things I heard were the insects and a single bullfrog croaking somewhere farther down the shoreline. Another ripple formed, larger this time. The red light drifted slightly, maybe 5 or 6 feet to the right, not fast, just a slow lateral slide. But the movement was too smooth to be a plane or helicopter, and it didn't have the green and white marker lights required for aircraft. I pulled my phone out and tried to record video, but the camera could barely pick up the glow. It looked like a faint red blur on the screen. The water didn't show up at all. While I fiddled with the phone, the sound around me changed. The insects didn't stop entirely, it wasn't that dramatic, but the noise flattened out, like they'd all backed off to a distance. Even the bullfrog sounded farther away than it had a minute earlier. Then the air pressure shifted, not enough to hurt, just enough that my ears felt too open, like the world got vacuumed out for half a second. The red light pulsed brighter once, and the ripple below it spread outward again, but this time the center did dip, not much, maybe an inch or two, like something pressed down from above but didn't touch the surface. I stepped back, bumping into my folding chair. I wasn't scared yet, exactly, but I felt a kind of tightness in my chest I didn't have a name for. I aimed my flashlight at the water, thinking maybe the beam would reveal whatever was under there, but the moment the light hit the lake, the red glow flickered. Just a little. A stutter. The ripple froze mid-expansion. I lowered the flashlight and the ripple finished expanding normally. I tried it again. Light on, flicker. Ripple pause. Light off, pulse and ripple synced again. It was reacting to the beam. I felt stupid standing there doing experiments, but it gave me something to focus on besides the crawling feeling in my spine. The red light drifted closer to shore, maybe 10 feet. Then, another 10. It didn't tilt or wobble the way a drone would. It moved like it was suspended on a rail the rest of us couldn't see. When it got maybe 20 feet out from the shoreline, the water reacted before the light pulsed. The lake surface tightened, like a sheet being pulled taut, then released. That's when I finally got scared. I started packing up fast, grabbed my chair, my bottle, shoved everything under one arm. I kept my eyes on the glow and walked backward toward the trees. The light pulsed harder now, brighter. Still not enough to light up the lake or the trees, it seemed self-contained, but strong enough that it left a faint blot in my vision. The ripples kept coming in perfect circles, larger now. Too large to make sense, stretching almost all the way to the reeds. I reached the edge of the parking area and nearly tripped over a root. For a moment, the trees blocked part of my view, but I could still see the redness through gaps in the branches. Then the glow stopped pulsing. It held steady. The lake surface stopped moving. Completely. Not even the smallest lap of water touched the shore. The air got heavy again, that same pressure shift, like a thick blanket settling over everything. I heard something, not from the sky, but from the ground, a kind of low, buzzing throb under my feet. Not electricity, more like a distant engine running under the earth. I looked back toward the water. The red light began to rise, slow, steady, straight up. The ripples didn't return. Nothing disturbed the lake now. It was glossy and dark like oil. I watched the light climb until it was maybe 200 feet above the water. Then it dimmed a little, held position, and slid sideways across the sky with this soft sideways drift. No acceleration, no tilt, no arc. Just a perfect horizontal glide. I followed it with my eyes until it reached the part of the sky where the treetops meet the horizon. It pulsed once more, faint, barely visible. Then it winked out, not faded, not flew off, just gone. The lake stayed mirror still for almost a full minute before a breeze finally broke the surface, and everything around me snapped back into normal sound. Insects, the frog, distant traffic from the far shore. It was like somebody unmuted the world. I stood there clutching my chair until my hands hurt. Eventually I forced myself to walk to the car. My legs felt unsteady on the gravel, like I'd run a mile without stretching. Driving home, every time I passed an opening in the trees, I checked the sky for any hint of red. Nothing showed. When I got back to my apartment, I set the chair in the corner and noticed it was shaking a little because my hands were still trembling. I sat on the couch for a long time, staring at nothing, replaying the ripples, those perfect circles in my head. I went back to Lake Brenton the next afternoon after work, just to prove to myself it would look normal. It did. Kids were swimming, someone was grilling. Water lapped against the shore like regular water. Standing there in daylight, I almost convinced myself I'd overreacted. Almost. Then I walked to the exact spot I'd been sitting the night before and saw a faint mark on the shore, a curved line in the sand, almost like someone had drawn the edge of a circle with a stick, then half erased it. The lake moved normally around it. Wind, chop, nothing strange. But the line stayed there, untouched by the waves. I didn't sit down. I didn't unpack anything. I just backed away from the water and didn't return until weeks later, when the memory finally loosened its grip enough that the lake felt like a lake again. Even now, sometimes when I'm near still water, I catch myself watching for a perfect circle forming where nothing should be, and for that dim red glow waiting above it, pulsing like a quiet signal I don't want to understand. My friend Ethan was the one who noticed the star. We were sitting in his backyard in Santa Fe, out past the city lights enough that you could actually see the sky without that orange haze drowning everything out. It was late, maybe close to midnight, and pretty cold for early November. The kind of cold where the air feels thin and your breath disappears fast. We had a small fire going in one of those metal patio bowls he bought on sale, but it barely took the edge off. Mostly we were just sitting there talking about work and nothing important. His yard backed up to a stretch of undeveloped scrub, so it was quiet except for the occasional dog barking a couple blocks over. Ethan leaned back in his chair, looking up, and said, "Okay, that star's moving." I thought he was joking. He joked about stuff all the time. But when I followed his finger, I saw what he meant. Kind of. One star, pretty bright, maybe magnitude of a typical planet, was drifting. Not across the sky like a satellite. It was moving in these tiny, slow circles. Tight ones. Like someone drawing loops with a pencil, just a little wider each cycle. I blinked, thinking my eyes were shaking or something. Then I covered one eye, then the other, trying to see if the movement was just my vision jumping. But it kept looping, smooth and controlled. "Could be a drone," I said, even though it was too high for that. Way too high. And no blinking lights. Just steady white. "Drones don't do that," he said. He sounded calm, but not in a joking way. We watched it make maybe 3 more circles. Slow, deliberate, like it was tracking something. Or maybe looking. I lifted my phone to zoom in, but the camera just showed a grainy white speck against the black. When I looked up again, less than 5 seconds later, the star was gone. Not moved. Not dimmed behind a cloud. Gone. The sky was clear. Dry New Mexico air. You could see even the faint stars near the horizon, but where that one had been, there was only empty darkness. Not even a flicker. I asked where'd it go. Where'd it go? Ethan didn't answer at first. He just kept staring at the spot, brow furrowed, like he was waiting for it to reappear. When he finally spoke, he said, "You looked away longer than you think." "I didn't," I said. "I swear I didn't." But the more I insisted, the quieter he got, like he didn't want to challenge me, but also didn't want to pretend nothing weird was happening. We sat there another minute. The fire crackled softly, and somewhere in the dark scrub beyond the fence, something rustled. Probably a rabbit or fox. Still made me jump. "So what was that?" I asked. He shook his head. "I don't know. You want another beer?" But he didn't get up right away. Neither did I. We just kept watching the sky a while longer, both pretending to be casual about it. After a few minutes, Ethan stood and walked to the edge of the yard. His backyard didn't have a fence, just a line of big rocks meant to mark the property boundary. Beyond that was open land with scattered junipers and tall weeds. He took his flashlight and shined it out there. I walked over too, hugging myself against the cold. We didn't see anything. No animals. No signs of people. Just silence. But the silence felt too thick, too complete. No insects. No wind sound. It reminded me of the way it gets right before a thunderstorm, but the sky was completely dry and clear. I checked the sky again out of habit. That one star was still missing. What's weird is that it wasn't like a bright planet disappearing. It wasn't obviously one of the main constellations. But the first thing I noticed was that the patch of sky around where it had been looked off. Like the darkness there was deeper. Not by much. Just enough that my eyes kept being pulled back to it, like they expected something to be there. We finally went back to our chairs. Ethan poked the fire a bit, sending sparks into the air. They rose fast, then slowed suddenly about 5 feet up, like they hit a pocket of heavier air before drifting off. "Did you see that?" I asked. "Yeah," he said quietly. We sat in silence again. I felt like I was waiting for something to happen, though I didn't know what. The sky looked normal except for that one empty spot. A few minutes later, another sound came from the scrub. Not rustling this time. More like a thud, soft and distant. Not big enough for a person. Not quite small enough for a rabbit either. We both pointed our flashlights that way. Nothing moved in the beam. "What are the odds someone's out there messing with us?" I asked. "Pretty low," he said. "Nobody hikes back there at night. It's all loose rock and cactus." "Maybe a coyote?" He shook his head. "Coyotes don't thud." I felt a little prickling on the back of my neck. Not fear exactly, just that sense of being watched from a place you can't pinpoint. I looked at the sky again. Still no star. Then something shifted in the dark scrub. A subtle change, like the horizon bent slightly. It wasn't movement at ground level. It was this brief distortion at the edge of my peripheral vision at sky height, like heat shimmer, but at night and in cold air. I turned my head sharply toward it. Nothing there. "What?" Ethan asked. "Thought I saw..." I started, then stopped. I didn't know how to describe it. He kept staring at me for a second, then looked back at the same direction. "You think it came down?" I swallowed. "I don't know what it did." My phone buzzed in my pocket, making me jump. I pulled it out. No notification, no missed calls. The battery jumped from 72% to 55%, then back to 68%. The screen brightness dimmed, then brightened. Ethan noticed. "Mine's doing that too," he said, holding it up. His screen flickered slightly, a faint, horizontal ripple across the pixels. We both put our phones on the patio table like they were hazardous. Then the backyard motion sensor light clicked on, except it pointed away from the scrub, toward the house. The sensor only came on when something passed directly in front of it. We were both behind it from that angle, and the air was still. Nothing moved. The light stayed on for maybe 10 seconds, buzzing faintly, then clicked off. We both stared at it, then at each other. "You want to go inside?" Ethan asked. I nodded, but neither of us stood. It felt wrong to leave the yard, like whatever was out there wanted us to turn our backs. That sounds dramatic, but that's the only way I can explain the feeling. We sat in silence, listening. Nothing for a long time. Then, not loud, but very clear, a single tap came from the direction of the scrub, like a rock knocking against another. Just once. We both froze. A few seconds later, a faint drift of air brushed past us, colder than the night had any right to be. It wasn't a breeze. It was too focused, too directional. It came from the dark scrub and moved straight toward us, then lifted upward as if pulled. I looked at the sky. The missing star was still missing. But something faint was there now. Not light, not a shape, just a barely noticeable warping, like you could almost see a curved surface that shouldn't exist. I blinked, and the distortion was gone. A second later, the normal sounds of the night came back. The distant dog, the far-off highway, the rustle of dry grass. It all returned at once, like someone unmuted the world. Ethan exhaled shakily. "Okay," he said, "I think we're done out here." We packed up the chairs and went inside without looking back. When we shut the sliding door, we both stood there listening, waiting. Nothing happened. After a few minutes, we tried to laugh it off, but neither of us really meant it. We watched a movie to distract ourselves. It didn't work. When I finally drove home around 2 in the morning, I kept checking the sky through the windshield. The stars looked normal again. No gaps, nothing circling. But halfway home, my radio cut to static for just a second. And when it cleared, the same patch of sky I'd been watching looked a shade darker than the rest. Only for a moment. Then it was gone. I couldn't tell you why, but for the next week, every time I stepped outside after dark, I kept looking up, searching for any sign of a star moving in slow, tight circles, and wondering what would happen if I looked away at the wrong time. I found the warm rock about 2 hours into the hike. It was late October in northern New Mexico up in the Sangre de Cristos. I'd started from the ski basin trailhead around noon, planning to make it to a little overlook I liked, and back down before dark. The weather had been clear when I parked. Bright sun, cold air, that thin, dry wind you only get at altitude. There were a few cars at the trailhead, but by the time I passed the first mile marker, I hadn't seen anyone for a while. The higher I climbed, the colder it got. Patches of old snow clung to the shaded side of the trail, and my breath came out in white puffs. The sun went behind some thin clouds, and the temperature dropped another few degrees. My fingers stung where they stuck out of my gloves. I remember thinking I should have brought a thicker hat. I was blowing into my hands and flexing them when my boot hit a patch of bare rock that felt wrong. Imagine stepping from cold tile to a heated floor. That quick little shock. That's what it felt like, except it was a chunk of granite wedged into the trail at 10,000 feet with frost around its edges. I stopped and stepped back, then forward again to make sure I hadn't imagined it. Same thing. The rock, about 3 feet long and maybe 2 feet wide, was warm. Not hot enough to burn, just like it had been sitting in direct sun on a summer day instead of in the shade of a cluster of pines. I looked up, half expecting a shaft of sunlight to be hitting it through the branches, but the canopy above that stretch was solid. No direct sun. Everything else around was crusted with thin ice. Melted snow had refrozen in little glassy patches off to the side. I squatted down and pressed my gloved hand flat to the rock, warm even through the glove. I pulled the glove off and touched it with my bare fingers. Definitely warm. Not steaming, not glowing, just wrong for where it was. A little uncomfortable feeling slid down my spine. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe the rock had some kind of mineral that held heat better, or maybe water running under it was warmer. I didn't know. I'm not a geologist. But the air around it was cold, and my knees were starting to ache from crouching there. I stood up and took a step back to get a better look at the whole section. That's when I noticed the sky. Directly above that stretch of trail, through a gap in the branches, the sky looked warped. It was subtle. If I hadn't been staring straight up, I might not have seen it at all. But there was this faint shimmer, like heat rising off asphalt in the summer. The blue behind it wobbled, bending slightly. There was no jet, no contrail, nothing that should have caused it. I moved a couple of steps to the left. The shimmer stayed over that same patch of trail. I moved to the right, same thing. I walked forward, past the warm rock, and looked up again. The distortion was behind me now, parked over the place I'd just been standing. The wind died down, not completely, but enough that the trees around me stopped creaking. It was suddenly very quiet. No birds, no distant road noise, no other hikers. I could hear my own breathing and the faint rush of blood in my ears. I stepped back onto the warm rock. The air around my legs got maybe a degree or two warmer. Not by much, but enough to notice. The hair on my arms lifted under my jacket like static was building. My phone buzzed in my pocket, which made me jump. I pulled it out. No notification, no call. The screen showed the time, 2:08 p.m., and the battery icon flickered from 68% down to 52%, held there, then slowly crawled back up to 64%. The GPS icon flashed once and then disappeared even though I had airplane mode on. I backed off the rock again. As soon as my boots hit dirt, the air felt normal cold. The static sensation vanished. The phone screen stabilized at 63% like nothing had happened. I laughed a little under my breath, a short, nervous sound, and told myself I was imagining it. High altitude, low blood sugar, whatever. I took a drink of water, ate half a granola bar, and decided to keep going. It was weird, but I didn't have a better explanation, and standing there, staring at a piece of stone wasn't going to change anything. As I walked away, I checked over my shoulder a few times. The rock looked like any other rock. The sky above it still had that slight ripple, but as the trail curved, branches blocked my view, and eventually I lost sight of it. About 10 minutes later, something else felt off. It took me a while to figure out what. I kept walking, expecting to meet the switchback that always told me I was halfway to the overlook. It never came. The trail only had so much variation, and I knew it pretty well. But the turns and rises weren't matching my memory. I stopped and pulled out my phone again to check the trail map I'd downloaded. The arrow showing my position spun in a slow circle, then snapped to a spot about 50 yards to the left of the trail line, as if I were walking in the woods off path. I rotated in place, watching it twitch. It wouldn't settle. I turned airplane mode off just long enough to see if GPS would behave better. No signal bars popped up, but the arrow jumped again, this time a quarter-mile ahead, near a junction I definitely hadn't reached. The map stuttered, then froze. The timestamp at the top of the screen read 2:48 p.m. I checked my watch. 2:31 p.m. I held them side by side. The watch ticked over to 2:32 while the phone stayed at 2:48, then suddenly updated all at once to 2:32 like it was correcting itself. That tight feeling in my chest came back. I stuffed the phone in my pocket, told myself I was just being jumpy, and kept walking. I paid extra attention to the trail markers this time, reading the carved numbers out loud to keep myself grounded. The wind came back, but only in short gusts, like someone was breathing on the trees instead of a steady breeze moving through. A couple of times it pushed hard enough to sway the pines, then cut out completely, leaving the branches settling and creaking in a way that didn't match the air. When I finally reached the overlook, the view was normal. Valley stretching out below, distant highway, a few scattered houses. The sun was dropping toward a bank of clouds, painting everything pale gold. For a few minutes, I felt stupid for freaking myself out, and I took a couple of pictures, ate the rest of the granola bar, and decided to head back down before the light got weird. Going down, I tried not to think about the rock, but my mind kept circling back to it. I timed my pace with my watch out of curiosity. It usually took me about 35 minutes to get back to that spot. At 27 minutes, I started looking for landmarks. The crooked pine with the lightning scar, the big boulder that looked like a face. They came and went in order, just like normal. But when I reached the point where I knew the warm rock had to be, the trail looked different. The pines thinned out a bit, and a patch of exposed stone spread across the path where I didn't remember there being so much bare rock. It wasn't just one stone now. It was a slab, maybe 10 feet long and 4 wide, slightly raised from the surrounding ground. Frost edged it in a clean line. I slowed down and reached my hand out. Warm, not hot, but warmer than my skin. The same even warmth as before, just over a bigger area. I stepped onto it and stopped. The world dulled. The sound of the wind faded like someone turned the volume down. My breathing sounded farther away from me, if that makes any sense. The trees at the edge of my vision seemed to bend inward a fraction, like I was looking through a wide-angle lens. I looked up through the gap in the branches. The distortion in the sky was bigger now. It wasn't just a shimmer. It was a column, like a vertical river of slightly bent air rising up from the rock. The clouds behind it warped as they moved past, stretching thin, then snapping back to shape once they cleared the area. There was no color change, no light, just that wavering vertical strip. Standing on the rock, I felt a faint vibration through my boots, like a truck idling far underground. It wasn't strong enough to shake dust loose or anything. It was just there at the edge of sensation. I don't know how long I stood there. 10 seconds? A minute? Time felt slippery. My phone buzzed again, a quick triple vibration like a notification coming in. I pulled it out, screen black, pressed the side button. Nothing happened for a moment, then it lit up, battery at 19%, even though it had been in the 60s earlier. The time said 4:11 p.m. My watch said 3:03. My throat went dry. I stepped off the stone. The moment my foot hit dirt, the vibration vanished. The sound of the wind returned full force, making me flinch. I looked up. The column of distortion was still there, but thinner, like whatever was causing it had pulled back slightly. I backed away fast, eyes locked on that shimmer. It didn't move toward me. It didn't do anything dramatic. It just hung there, rippling gently, as if heat were rising from the rock in a place that was too cold for heat to be doing that. By the time I rounded the next bend and trees blocked my view, my heart was pounding hard enough to make me lightheaded. I almost ran the rest of the way down. Every now and then I'd feel a brief wave of warmth against my legs, like walking through a sunbeam inside a mostly shaded forest. It wouldn't last. Just brush past. But it always made me check the sky. Once, maybe 10 minutes after I'd left the rock behind, the trees opened up and I could see the ridgeline above where I knew the slab was. The sky over that part of the mountain still had that faint vertical wobble to it, even from a distance. Not a cloud, not smoke, just a patch of air that looked wrong. I focused on the trail and forced myself to keep moving. The light was changing fast now, going from gold to that flat gray that comes right before dusk. Temperatures dropped again. My fingers went numb even inside my gloves. The last half mile to the trailhead felt longer than the whole hike up. When I finally saw the parking lot through the trees, a kind of weak relief hit me. There were only two cars left, mine and an old blue Tacoma. I didn't see anyone around, but there was a faint scratching sound coming from the Tacoma's bed, like something shifting in a plastic bin. I didn't investigate. I shoved my pack in the backseat of my car and got in, leaving the engine off for a second to just sit. The forest was quiet, no birds, no voices. Even the wind seemed to have faded. I started the car. The radio came on automatically, mid-song. I reached to turn it down, but right as my fingers hit the knob, all the sound cut out. The display went blank for a second, then lit back up with a full volume bar and no station info, like it had reset itself. A high, almost inaudible tone hummed through the speakers, there and not there, like my ears were making it up. I turned the radio off completely. The hum stopped. The dashboard clock read 4:38 p.m. My watch said 3:29. I looked back and forth between them, then at my phone, which had died somewhere in the last 10 minutes. Black screen, no response when I held the button. That was enough. I pulled out of the lot and drove down the mountain, hands tight on the wheel. So as I descended, the normal world seeped back in. I passed a couple in hiking gear walking along the shoulder, their dog trotting ahead. A truck came around a bend going the opposite way, headlights on. A crow flew low across the road in front of my windshield. By the time I hit cell range again, the car clock had synced with the time on my phone after it rebooted. They both agreed it was a little after 5. My watch still insisted it wasn't even 4 yet. I didn't go back to sync them that night. I left the watch on the counter and let it be wrong until the battery ran out weeks later. I've been up that trail since then, but only in summer and only with other people. We've never found that exact section of warm rock again. There's bare stone in a few places that might be it, but it's always cold when we touch it, even in August. Still, sometimes when we stop for water, I catch myself staring at the sky through the gaps in the branches, waiting to see that slight, impossible shimmer, bending the air, where the mountain should just be mountain and nothing else. I was driving back from visiting my sister in La Push, taking that narrow 2-lane road that winds along the coast. It was close to midnight, fog rolling in so thick it felt like the ocean was quietly climbing up onto the land. I wasn't tired exactly, but it was the kind of drive where you start paying attention to every little noise in the car because there's nothing else to focus on. My GPS was mounted on the dash, glowing this soft blue. I remember checking it every few minutes just to reassure myself I hadn't missed a turn. Service out there drops in and out whenever it feels like it, so the map sometimes froze for a second before catching up. I was maybe 20 minutes south of Rialto Beach when the GPS froze again. I didn't think much of it until it updated, not to the road, but to open water. The icon for my car was sitting about half a mile offshore, like I was driving straight across the Pacific. I stared at it for a second, confused, thinking maybe it glitched and grabbed some old cached map. But the screen wasn't frozen anymore. The little arrow, that tiny blue triangle, was drifting farther out, inch by inch, as if the car was still in motion. I tapped the screen. Nothing. I closed the map and reopened it. Same thing. My car symbol was floating in the ocean, still creeping forward like it was following some invisible road under the waves. I slowed down, more out of instinct than anything else. The fog swallowed the headlights, making everything outside look like blank white paper. The only real sense of direction I had was the faint yellow line down the middle of the road. Then the GPS snapped back to normal. One blink, it was in the ocean. The next blink, it was right back on the winding stretch of Highway 110, exactly where I actually was. No lag, no buffering, just instantaneous correction. The map rotated sharply to realign itself, like it was embarrassed it had gotten lost. But when it corrected, something else happened. A faint, pale light appeared in the reflection across my windshield. I didn't see it in the sky directly, just in the glass, the way you sometimes catch a glimpse of a passing car's headlights behind you. Except there weren't any cars behind me. The road had been empty for at least 15 minutes. The light wasn't bright. It had this thin, washed-out color to it, almost like a flashlight beam filtered through milk. I looked up past the windshield to see it for real, but there was nothing there. just fog and the vague dark shape of the treetops on my left. When I looked back at the windshield reflection, the light was still there. Very faint. Steady. Like it was hovering somewhere above the car, but only visible as a reflection. My heart thudded harder than it needed to. I kept driving, slower now, maybe 30 miles an hour. The reflection didn't move much, just drifted slightly side to side in this way that didn't match the motion of my car. After maybe 10 seconds, it faded out. Not like it sped away, just like someone turned down the dimmer switch until it was gone. I stared at the sky for a long time after that, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. The fog made everything above me look flat and low, like a ceiling I could almost touch, but I didn't see any lights or shapes breaking through it. I kept going. I tried the radio, but it was nothing but static. Not even the faint kind where you can sometimes hear a distant station bleeding through. Just thick, empty static. About 5 minutes later, I heard a soft tapping. Not on the window, on the roof. It was gentle, almost uneven, like someone running their fingers along the top of the car. I turned off the radio to listen better, even though it was already static. Tap, tap, pause. Then 2 more taps faster together. I pulled over without thinking. My hands were sweating, and I could feel my pulse in my neck. I rolled the window down and stuck my head out. Nothing. No branches overhead, no cliffs, no loose pieces on the roof that might have been flapping. The fog pressed in thicker without the forward motion of the car. The air felt damp and heavy, like I'd stepped into a steam room. I kept listening for whatever had tapped, but the woods were dead quiet. Even the ocean, which I knew was somewhere to my right, sounded distant and faint. I decided to get out and check the roof. I opened the door slowly. The dome light flicked on, and the fog around me lit up like I was inside a glowing bubble. I reached up and ran my hand across the top of the car. It was warm. Not hot, not anything extreme, just warm in a way that didn't fit the night around me. The hood and the sides of the car were cold like normal metal would be at midnight in coastal fog. Only the roof had this lingering heat to it, almost like it had been under a lamp. I stood there for a second with my hand pressed against the metal, trying to decide if the warmth meant anything or if I was just worked up, but it didn't feel like I was imagining it. It was too distinct. Then I heard something up the road, a soft whooshing sound, like a strong gust of wind moving through leaves. Except the trees weren't moving. Their branches stayed completely still, silhouetted against the fog. The whooshing passed overhead, not around me. A brief swell of sound, maybe 2 seconds long. I didn't see anything, but the fog shifted, just barely, like something large had displaced the air above me. I got back in the car fast and locked the doors without meaning to. My breathing felt tight in my chest, controlled but shallow, and enough like I was trying not to make a sound. When I pulled back onto the road, my headlights flickered twice. They didn't go out, just dimmed and brightened again quickly, almost like they were reacting to something external rather than an electrical issue. I drove the rest of the way, barely blinking. The GPS didn't glitch again. The tapping didn't return. But the radio stayed static until I hit the outskirts of Forks, where it suddenly snapped back to a normal station mid-song. I got home around 1 a.m. and sat in my driveway for a solid minute before getting out. The roof of the car was cool by then. The next morning, I checked the GPS history. The entire stretch where it showed me drifting out to sea wasn't recorded. It jumped from one normal point on the road to the next, like the ocean detour never happened. I'm not a tech person, so maybe it was a software bug. Maybe the light on the windshield was just some weird reflection. Maybe the warmth was from the engine somehow, even though that didn't make sense physically. But sometimes, when I think about the way the fog shifted overhead, like something big and quiet moved just above me, I get that same tight feeling in my chest, and I still don't trust my GPS anywhere near the coast. I noticed it while letting my dog out behind the duplex. It was late, close to midnight, and the sky was clear enough that you could see every star. This was in Ridge Park, Colorado, where light pollution is low enough that the sky actually looks like a sky and not a faded ceiling. I wasn't even really paying attention at first. I was standing in the cold waiting for Hazel to sniff the same patch of grass she sniffed every night. Then I looked up, and there it was. A blurry spot in the sky. At first, I thought it was my eyes. I blinked hard, rubbed them a little, but the blur didn't change. Everything else, stars, the line of the roof, the silhouette of the mountains, was sharp. But one small patch, about the size of my fist held up at arm's length, looked out of focus, like someone had smudged a lens. I stared at it for maybe 10 seconds before it moved. Not fast. It drifted. Slow enough that I questioned whether it was drifting at all, like maybe my depth perception was off. But no, after a few seconds, it was obviously shifting across the stars, the way a cloud might move if it was way up in the stratosphere and incredibly thin. Except there were no clouds. The air was freezing and totally clear. Hazel growled once, a low, uncertain sound. She doesn't growl at the sky. At raccoons, sure. At the neighbor's cat, definitely. But not at empty air. She backed up toward the door. I kept watching the blur. My brain kept trying to interpret it as something normal, maybe a patch of wind distortion, maybe a tiny cloud I just couldn't see the edges of, but didn't behave like anything I'd seen. It didn't expand or thin out. It didn't shift shape. It just drifted, maintaining this weird fuzzy oval like an out-of-focus asteroid was passing overhead. When it reached a thin strip of cloud near the horizon, I swear this happened, it disappeared behind it, like it had depth, like it was actually above the cloud. I waited for it to come out the other side. It didn't. Hazel scratched at the back door, clearly done with whatever was happening. I opened it for her, stepped inside, and immediately felt stupid for how fast I locked it. But something about that blur had wedged under my skin. I couldn't shake the feeling that it hadn't been a trick of the eyes. I tried to go to bed, but the more I thought about it, the less I liked sitting in a dark room with the blinds open, so I closed them. Then I opened them again. I didn't want to feel like I was hiding from something. Eventually, I just lay there with my phone on my chest, scrolling nothing. Around 1:20 a.m., I heard a soft popping sound, like static from a radio just before it tunes in. It wasn't in the house. It came from outside, maybe down the street. Hazel lifted her head from where she was curled at the foot of the bed. Her ears went straight up. Another pop, slightly louder. Then silence. I got up and looked out the blinds. The street was empty, just the orange glow of the sodium lamp at the corner, the shadow of the neighbor's pickup, the fence line. No movement, no people, nothing. I almost closed the blinds again when I saw something shift near the far end of the street. Not a person, not an animal, just a faint distortion in the air, like heat rising off asphalt. Except it was below freezing, and this heat ripple was moving horizontally across the road. The air behind it shimmered slightly, like looking through warped glass. It drifted past the street lamp, and for an instant the light above it flickered. Not a normal flicker either. It dimmed smoothly, almost like a dimmer switch being turned down. Then the distortion passed, and the lamp returned to normal. I held perfectly still, fingers tight on the blinds. The distortion kept moving, slow and steady, until it faded into the darkness near the cul-de-sac. I didn't sleep after that. The next morning, I went outside early just to prove to myself the world was normal again. The sky was clear blue, no blur, no distortion. Hazel trotted around the yard like she'd forgotten everything. But as I was heading back inside, I noticed the fence. 5 of the boards near the far side had a faint powdery residue on them, like someone rubbed chalk across the wood. When I touched it, it felt cold. Too cold for sunlight to have warmed the board, but colder than the rest of the fence. My fingers tingled numbly for a moment after brushing it. I told myself it was frost, even though it didn't look like frost. That evening, I drove to the grocery store, partly because I needed things, mostly because I didn't want to sit alone in the house again. The store was bright, noisy, normal. I lingered in aisles I didn't need anything from. On the drive home, just after I turned onto Ridge Park Road, the radio cut out for half a second. Not off, not static, just silence. And then came back. I frowned and tapped the console. The same thing happened again a few seconds later. Then I saw something in the rearview mirror. A shimmer. A small patch of air behind my car, slightly warped like a reflection off water. It hovered maybe 20 feet off the ground and drifted across the tops of the trees lining the road. Compared to the trees, I could tell it was actually moving, keeping pace with me for a few seconds before veering off. My stomach dropped. I slowed down, pulled onto the shoulder, and turned around in my seat. The shimmering patch slid between branches, then rose upward, higher and higher until it merged with the sky. Gone. I sat there gripping the wheel, trying to convince myself it was just some weird light trick. Maybe headlights from another car hitting ice crystals in the air. Except there were no other cars, and no ice crystals. And the radio cutting out right before hadn't felt like coincidence. Back home, I didn't turn on any lights for a while. I kept the living room dim and sat on the couch with Hazel's head on my knee. Every few minutes I'd glance at the window, half expecting to see that blurry patch floating there. Nothing happened for hours. Then, just after midnight, Hazel stood up abruptly and walked to the back door. Not whining, not scratching, just staring at it with her tail stiff. I joined her, but I didn't open it. Through the glass, I couldn't see anything. The yard was silent, but the air outside felt still, too still, like the whole neighborhood was holding its breath. Then one star above the yard flickered. Not twinkled, flickered, like a candle flame. Once, twice. Then the star dimmed slightly and stayed dim, as if something had moved in front of it. I waited, not moving, barely breathing. Slowly, that dim section of sky, just a tiny dark patch, shifted to the left. A smooth, steady motion. It passed between two brighter stars and then faded, blending back into the night like it had never been separate from it. Hazel backed away from the door. I locked it again, even though I knew that wouldn't mean anything to something that could pass through the sky like that. I didn't sleep that night either. When dawn came, the world looked normal again. Cars starting, neighbors walking their dogs, distant traffic hum. But it didn't feel normal. I still look up every night, checking the sky the way you check a bruise to see if it's still tender. Most nights, there's nothing. But a few nights ago, a patch of stars near the tree line dimmed all at once, like someone touched the sky and smudged it. And for a moment I thought I saw something drifting just behind that smudge, as if the sky itself was hiding whatever was moving through it. The first one looked like a slow star that didn't belong where it was. I noticed it while sitting on the hood of my car, parked at the overlook above Crescent Bluff. It was just past midnight, warm and a little windy, the kind of night where you could still smell the dry grass even after dark. I'd come up there to clear my head after a rough shift. Nothing dramatic, just needed some quiet. My name's Marco Hensley. I lived a few minutes outside town in a rental off Route 18. This overlook sat on a rise that faced miles of low hills and farmland. I'd been up there plenty of times. Normally you'd see planes, satellites, the occasional slow drone from someone messing around. This wasn't any of those. The light moved sideways, stopped, then shifted diagonally. Clean, deliberate motions. It didn't blink. It didn't leave a trail. It just slid across the sky like it was tracing lines only it knew. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees, watching closer. Then another light appeared to the left, same brightness, same distance. It moved in the opposite direction but matched the first one's pace perfectly. After a few seconds, both lights arced into a loose circle, then cut through the middle of it, at right angles, geometric. That was the only way to describe it, like someone sketching shapes on invisible glass. I pulled my phone out, aiming the camera upward, but the screen barely picked up anything. Just dark with a faint blur where the light should have been. In real life, it was clear as day. A third light showed up above them, a little dimmer, and that's when I felt my stomach tighten. Not panic, not full fear, just that slow creeping feeling like something had noticed me without me understanding how. The air felt heavier, like the breeze had stalled. Even the usual night sounds from down the hill seemed muted. The three lights started moving together now, forming angles that made no sense on instinct, but still looked precise. One would move, the others followed, like they were locked into the same path, but offset slightly. I checked the time. 12:14 a.m. I kept watching, barely blinking. The shapes shifted from lines into something that looked almost like a rotating square, though the corners were never perfectly connected. It was like the idea of a square instead of the thing itself. My car radio clicked on by itself for half a second, just static. Then it shut off again. I turned my head toward the driver's seat, then back to the sky. The lights kept moving, slow and steady, no sound, no hum, just silent motion in patterns that made my eyes ache slightly after a while. A gust of wind ran up the hill suddenly, cool and sharp, lifting dust and dry leaves around my feet. The smell of dirt got stronger. I stood up, stretching my back, still staring upward. That's when one of the lights dropped lower. Not fast, just a controlled descent. It was still far away, but now it felt closer than anything should. The other two continued their pattern while the lower one drifted off to the side, almost like it was circling the outline of the hill. My phone screen dimmed, even though it was fully charged. I tapped it, waking it again. Everything looked normal. I glanced over my shoulder at the empty stretch of road behind me. No headlights, no movement. When I looked back up, the lights had shifted formation again. Now they were aligned in a shallow curve, rising and falling in slow rhythm, like something breathing. I felt stupid just standing there, but I couldn't move. My brain kept trying to attach logic to it. Military test. Atmospheric weirdness. Some drone tech I didn't know about. None of it fit. The lowest light paused mid-sky and pulsed once, very faint. Just a slightly deeper glow for a second, not bright enough to light the ground, not enough to cast shadows. It reminded me of someone flicking a lighter behind frosted glass. My hands felt colder now. The night air pressed in around me, quiet and watchful. The trailing light slowly rose back up until all three were level again. They reformed the strange angled patterns, looping through invisible shapes that felt almost purposeful. Then, one by one, they started to dim, not flicker, not vanish, just fade, as if distance itself was swallowing them. The sky behind them didn't change, no cloud cover, no haze thick enough to justify it. They simply grew less solid until they looked like thin pinpricks, then nothing. The night returned to normal. Wind moved again. Crickets picked up where they left off. I stood there another minute, looking at the empty sky, trying to convince myself it was done. The feeling didn't leave. I walked back around the car and sat inside, door still open, watching above the windshield. My heart beat faster than it should have, but not in a rush. More like it was bracing for something that didn't show. Another faint light appeared higher up, much dimmer than before. It didn't join any pattern. It just hovered there, perfectly still. Then it slid upward. Not towards space, not sideways, but like it was dissolving straight into the darkness above. It slowly thinned until it blended into the black sky like smoke pulled backward. I closed the car door and started the engine without thinking. The dashboard lit normally. No warnings. No glitches. Driving home, every hill felt too quiet. I kept glancing up through the windshield, half expecting to see those shapes again, hovering above the road, back, tracing silent grids over rooftops and power lines. Nothing followed me. When I pulled into my driveway, the porch light glowed the same dull yellow it always had. The house looked normal. Still, I waited a second before getting out. Inside, everything sounded ordinary. The fridge, the fan, the light buzz above the sink. I checked the time again, 12:47 a.m. It didn't feel like 30 minutes had passed. Through my bedroom window, the sky looked calm and empty. No strange motion, no glow. But every time I closed my eyes, I still pictured those impossible shapes moving in slow, careful patterns, like something was testing how the sky itself could bend before letting it quietly swallow the evidence. The power went out right as I was rinsing a mug in the kitchen sink, and everything dropped into that dull, heavy quiet you only notice when it happens all at once. No fridge hum, no heater, no little buzz from the overhead light, just stillness and the faint sound of wind pushing snow against the windows. My name's Elise Krawiec. I lived alone in a small brick house on the edge of Maple Run, a quiet suburban strip that normally felt too boring to hold anything strange. That night was already off, though. The snow had started earlier than forecast, thick flakes piling up fast, muffling the whole neighborhood like someone threw padding over the world. I stood there, hands still wet, waiting for the lights to flicker back. They didn't. I grabbed my phone and saw no signal. Not surprising. Storms messed with it sometimes. I sighed and dried my hands on my sweatshirt, stepping into the living room. That's when I saw it. A pale glow pressed through the curtains, soft and wide like a muted moonlight, but lower, closer. The curtain fabric caught the light and turned it into this faint silvery wash across the wall and coffee table. At first I thought maybe one of the neighbors had a generator or a truck had pulled up outside, but the glow didn't flicker or move. It just sat there, steady and calm. I walked closer. heart tapping faster in a slow, annoyed rhythm. "Hello?" I muttered, feeling dumb immediately. The street outside should have been dark. During outages, the whole block usually dipped into total black. But this light didn't feel like street lighting. It didn't hum. It didn't streak. It didn't cast shadows the way headlights did. It just existed. I pulled the curtain back slightly, expecting to see a car, maybe Todd from across the street checking on his snowblower or some utility truck parked crookedly. There was nothing. Snow covered the sidewalk, pristine and smooth. No tire tracks, no footprints. The glow wasn't coming from any visible source. It just hung there, suspended a little above the street, like a hovering fog that shone instead of clouded. My breath fogged the glass as I stared. A faint blur shifted inside the glow. Not a shape exactly, just a slightly darker patch moving lazily from one side to the other. It reminded me of how fish sometimes move behind cloudy water. I stepped back. Something about the silence bothered me more than the light. No cars, no wind anymore, not even the distant crunch of someone walking their dog. The heating kicked off completely, and the house dropped a degree fast. I wrapped my arms around myself and kept watching. The glow pulsed once, very soft, like a heartbeat. I checked the time on my phone, 8:42 p.m. It felt later. I tried the light switch just to see if anything flickered. Still dead. The glow outside brightened slightly, enough that my living room looked dim but visible, outlines of furniture clear where only shadows should have been. I noticed dust motes drifting through the beam, slow and aimless. Then I heard a faint tapping sound from somewhere above the house. Not on the roof exactly, more like a dull pressure shifting, the way ice expands in pipes but slower. I froze, eyes still fixed on the curtains. The darker patch inside the glow moved again, this time lower, like it was tracing the outline of the front yard. It didn't look solid, just an absence in brightness. I edged closer to the door and pressed my palm lightly to the cool glass. No heat, no vibration, just cold and very faint static, like when you touched an old TV. The glow held steady. Then, as suddenly as it came, the power snapped back on. The living room light blinked overhead. The heater groaned back to life. The fridge whirred. Sound rushed back into the house like water filling an empty bowl, and the glow vanished. Outside was pure darkness again, except for the normal porch lights down the block slowly turning back on, one by one. The snow remained untouched. I stood there breathing shallow, staring through the window, expecting to see anything that made sense. A truck driving away, someone moving. Even just a shift in the air. Nothing. I unlocked the front door and stepped onto the porch, boots crunching softly into fresh snow. The air hit cold and sharp, but clean. No strange haze, no scent except snow and damp concrete. The street looked exactly how it always did after a storm. Silent. Ordinary. I walked a few steps down the path and studied the area where the glow had been, but the ground showed no tracks, no melted spots, nothing flattened or disturbed. My phone buzzed suddenly with a missed text notification from my sister, Mara, sent 40 minutes earlier. I hadn't heard it come through. I checked the time again, 9:07 p.m. I didn't remember 40 minutes passing at all. I headed back inside, locking the door behind me and flipping the porch light back off. The house felt normal again, but heavier somehow, like the walls had absorbed something and didn't know where to put it. I sat on the couch, staring at the curtained window, waiting for the glow to return. It didn't. The snow kept falling outside, steady and dumb, soft flakes catching faint reflection from the street lamps. Cars passed occasionally now, tires hissing over the wet road. I tried distracting myself, scrolling through my phone, reheating my tea, anything that made the night feel routine again. Every few minutes I glanced toward the window. Nothing. Close to midnight, I finally forced myself to turn in. The bedroom was colder than usual, but not unbearable. I left a small lamp on, just enough to break the dark. When I slid under the blankets, I noticed the faintest flicker of pale light sweep across the opposite wall, like a reflection from a passing mirror. I rolled to face the window. Outside, far above the rooftop, something pale drifted slowly across the snow-heavy clouds. Dim enough, I almost thought I imagined it. It moved smoothly, then thinned and blended into the gray sky until it became another layer of night. My alarm clock read 12:03 a.m. The power stayed steady. No flickering, no more tapping sounds, just quiet and the slow hum of normal life. I lay there until my breathing evened out again, listening to the heater cycle, the distant hush of trees shifting under snow. Everything stayed where it belonged. By morning, the street looked ordinary. Plows ran through early, neighbors brushed off cars, dogs pulled at leashes, and no one mentioned anything strange. But I kept thinking about that soft glow pressing through my curtains, calm and patient, like it had been waiting for something I didn't understand. The vibration rolled through the car so lightly at first, I thought it was just the engine settling. I had been parked at a small pull-off just outside Truth or Consequences, New Mexico, killing time before heading the rest of the way home. The sun had dropped behind the low hills, and the air still felt thick with leftover heat from the day. The asphalt shimmered faintly, like it hadn't let go of the warmth yet. My name is Darren Cole, and I'd pulled over because my head felt full after driving for hours. The town lights were far off, barely visible, and the desert around me looked flat and endless. No other cars, no wind, just quiet. Then that faint tremor passed through the steering wheel and the seat beneath me. It wasn't sharp. It was more like the sensation you get when a semi rolls by, except nothing moved on the road. No headlights, no sound, just that dull vibration, humming, almost, lasting a few seconds before fading. I sat there listening, waiting for it to happen again. Outside, the horizon had turned a dusty purple, the last of the daylight thinning out. That's when I noticed the glow. Low and far off, just above the silhouette of the hills, a soft, pale light drifted from left to right. It looked too smooth to be a plane and too silent to be anything I recognized. It didn't brighten the ground in front of it. It just hovered there, steady. I leaned forward instinctively, gripping the wheel like I needed to ground myself. The vibration came back, a little stronger this time, like something heavy passed nearby even though the road remained empty. The light kept gliding, slow and calm, as if it had its own path no one else could see. I cracked the window, expecting to hear something, but the air was still and dry. No engine noise, no wind, just quiet and that faint glow moving along the horizon. After maybe a minute, the light paused. Not slowed, just stopped. It sat there, unmoving, the way a star might hang in the sky, except this was far too low for that. I watched it, jaw tight, eyes burning from not blinking. The vibration stopped too. Everything went still. I checked my mirrors, half expecting to spot another car or some source behind me. Nothing. Empty road in every direction. A strange pressure filled the space around the car, like my ears wanted to pop, but never quite did. My phone screen lit up with a notification and then faded again. The time read 8:17 p.m. I kept staring at that pale dot, trying to make sense of it. Was it someone using a drone? A weird reflection off distant glass? Even those explanations didn't sit right. The glow slowly brightened, not harsh, just steady enough to make my skin feel tight. And then it started moving again, gliding in the opposite direction this time, slower, like it was reconsidering where it wanted to go. As it moved, the faint vibration returned, but softer, softer, like a distant heartbeat I could feel in the floor of the car. I opened the door partway and stepped out, boots hitting warm gravel. The air smelled like dust and sage. No sound of insects. No breeze. The glow slid just above the line where land met sky. It never rose, never dipped, just floated. Something about it made me feel watched, even though it barely felt aware of anything at all. A memory hit me suddenly, of my older brother Jonah telling me about strange lights he swore he saw once near Alamogordo when we were younger. I'd laughed it off back then. Standing there, staring at this thing, I didn't feel like laughing. The light paused again, almost like it sensed I was paying attention. I stayed still, afraid that movement would change whatever was happening. Minutes dragged by. The air felt heavier somehow, pressing down without actually weighing anything. The desert around me should have been alive with small sounds, but it felt muted, like the world had been turned down a notch. Then slowly the glow began to fade, not blinking out, just dimming, thinning, blending into the horizon until the outline vanished completely. The landscape returned to its plain, dark shape, like nothing had happened. And just as quietly as it arrived, the vibration stopped again. I stood there another few minutes, staring at the same empty stretch of desert, waiting for the light to come back, or for the rumble to return. Nothing did. Eventually, I slid back into the car and shut the door. the quiet clicking sealing me in. The air inside felt too still. I turned the key in the ignition just to hear something familiar, the low engine idle settling around me. The radio came on softly, static and a faint country song from somewhere miles away. I turned it off almost immediately. I didn't want anything layered on top of what I'd just heard and felt. I sat there longer than I meant to, eyes flicking between the horizon and the dashboard. The time ticked forward normally. No jumps, no odd behavior. After maybe 10 minutes, I finally pulled back onto the road, headlights cutting through the dark as I headed out. The drive home felt normal enough. Traffic picked up near the outskirts of town. Streetlights steadied my nerves slightly. Still, every time the road curved and the land stretched open again, I found myself scanning the horizon, searching for that soft, pale glow. It never returned. Later that night, lying in my own bed with the fan humming and the distant sound of my neighbor's dog barking, I replayed that moment again and again. The way the vibration passed through the car. The way the light just paused like motion didn't matter to it. No explanation ever felt right. Not drones. Not planes. Not anything familiar. All I knew for certain was that for a few minutes out there in the quiet desert, something had moved across the horizon that didn't seem to follow the same rules as everything else around it. And then it left, quietly, without leaving anything behind. The star brightened suddenly, like someone had turned up a dimmer switch. It held that brightness for a few seconds, then softened again, fading back into the rest of the sky as if it had moved farther away from me. I was sitting on the hood of my car at a small overlook off Highway 50 in eastern New Mexico, the kind of spot people used to park at to look at the sky or take a break from driving. It was late, close to midnight, and the desert air had cooled fast after a warm day. A thin wind slid through the brush, bringing the dry smell of dirt and sage. My name is Victor Hale, and I'd pulled over because the road was getting to me. It had been hours of straight darkness, just headlights cutting through empty land. I figured 10 minutes under the stars would settle my head. They were clear that night. No clouds, no haze, just a wide spread of white points. I leaned back against the windshield and let my eyes drift across them. That's when I noticed the one that changed. At first, I thought it was a plane, but there was no blinking, no sound, no steady path. It swelled brighter, then eased back like it was retreating. I watched it hard, trying to see if it repeated. It didn't. It just stayed faint and still again. I let out a slow breath and tried to laugh it off. The desert played tricks sometimes. Heat shimmer, weird perspective, and tired eyes. I told myself that and shifted on the hood. A few moments later, the wind stopped completely. Not just died down, stopped, like someone hit mute on the world. The brush froze, the distant hiss of insects cut out. Even the low hum from my car's cooling engine sounded dulled. I sat up, muscles tight. The silence felt heavy, like the air had more weight to it. That same star flickered faintly again, not brighter this time, just weaker, as if it was struggling. I stared, squinting, and noticed it wasn't exactly where it had been before. Barely off, but off enough to make my stomach turn. My phone suddenly went dark in my hand. No warning, no vibration. The screen just blacked out. I pressed the button. Nothing. A low vibration crept through the metal hood beneath me. Soft, steady, more like a pressure than a sound. I slid off the car slowly, boots crunching on gravel, and stood there staring upward like an idiot. The vibration passed through my chest, light but steady. My teeth felt faintly numb. I whispered, "What the hell?" without really meaning to. Another star nearby dimmed slightly, then returned. Then the first one grew brighter again, stronger this time, enough to throw a faint sheen over the landscape. It was still silent. No streak, no motion, just this slow idea of distance shifting. The vibration grew slightly stronger and then cut off all at once. The silence that followed felt unreal. 30 seconds might have passed, or maybe 5 minutes. I wasn't sure. My sense of time felt stretched and thin. The wind returned slowly, brushing across my face. The insects resumed. The star settled back to normal. I looked down at my phone. The screen flickered and came back. The clock read 12:47 a.m. I knew I'd parked around 12:20. My stomach tightened. I checked my call log. No missed calls, no notifications, just a normal screen like nothing had happened. I glanced back up, but the sky looked ordinary again. Calm, quiet, Empty. I got back in the car and shut the door, though I didn't start the engine yet. I just sat there, listening to my own breathing. My hands trembled slightly on the steering wheel. A faint glow moved along the horizon far ahead, low and flat. It didn't illuminate the ground or the scrub, just hovered and slid smoothly left to right before fading into nothing. I told myself it had to be distant headlights or some reflection off the road. But the road curved miles away, and the glow didn't behave like a car. A strange sense of pressure filled my ears again, light but uncomfortable, like the start of a headache. I turned the key and started driving, needing motion, needing the familiar rhythm of tires on asphalt. As I pulled back onto the highway, the glow reappeared off to my right, keeping pace with me. Same speed, same distance, no change. I tried to ignore it and focused on the road. The sky stayed clear. The stars looked normal now, but that pressure never fully lifted. The glow drifted slightly backward, then forward again, steady and silent. My heart beat faster, despite my attempts to stay calm. After a few miles, it faded, just dissolving into the night. I didn't slow down. The rest of the drive passed uneasily quiet. No music on the radio, no static, just the low hum of the road and my own breathing. When I finally reached my small rental outside Roswell, the place looked normal. Porch light on, screen door swinging slightly in the breeze. I parked and sat for another minute, gathering myself. Inside, I turned on the lamp in the living room. The normal yellow light helped a little. I dropped my keys on the small wooden table and glanced out the front window. For a second, I thought I saw a faint shimmer high in the sky, barely visible, moving slowly away from where I stood. Then it was gone. The air inside felt still, too still, as if sound didn't want to move. I pulled the curtain shut and leaned against the cool wall, breathing slow, trying to ground myself in the solid feel of the room. Outside, the night stayed quiet. No hum, no vibration, just the distant whisper of desert wind moving over empty land. The hum slid into my sleep like it had always been there. I opened my eyes slowly, not fully awake yet, just aware of this low, steady sound coming through the open crack of my bedroom window. It wasn't loud, it wasn't sharp, it felt almost like pressure more than noise, like something vibrating far away across the flat land. My phone on the nightstand glowed faintly. 4:36 a.m. Outside, the horizon past the cornfields lit up pale for a few seconds. A soft white glow bleeding up and then fading again. No flash, no thunder, just a quiet bloom of light and then nothing. I pushed myself upright in bed, heart beating a little faster than normal. The hum continued. I lived just outside a town called Millbrook, the kind of place where everyone knows who owns which dog. My name's Trevor Haynes, and my house sits right at the edge of open farmland. Normally, that early morning hour is dead silent. No cars, no voices. Just wind and the occasional coyote cry. That night felt different. I swung my legs over the edge of the bed and walked toward the window, pulling the thin curtain back just enough to peer through. The sky was still dark, stars barely visible behind low-hanging clouds. The fields beyond my backyard stretched flat and empty. The horizon stayed black now, like the glow had never happened. The hum persisted. It wasn't coming from inside. No appliances, no fan. Nothing was running. I cracked the window wider, letting cold night air brush across my face. The sound grew slightly clearer. Still faint, still steady, but definitely there, like something broad and distant humming through the ground itself. I stood there listening, unsure whether to feel stupid or concerned. Another pale glow crept along the horizon line, slow and soft, similar to the first. It hovered for a few seconds, then faded again into the dark. No sound change. No wind. My chest tightened slightly. I stepped back from the window and glanced around the room, as if something inside might suddenly explain this. Nothing moved. Shadows sat where they should. The house creaked normally. The hum carried on. I pulled on a hoodie and slipped my feet into boots without turning on any lights. For reasons I couldn't fully explain, I wanted to see it more clearly. Outside, the night air felt damp and cool against my skin. A faint mist clung low over the grass. Everything smelled like wet earth and cold air. The hum filled the open space more noticeably now. Not louder, just impossible to ignore. I walked slowly toward the back fence, eyes fixed on the horizon beyond the fields. The land stretched wider there, uninterrupted by buildings. Another glow rolled over the far end of the world. Pale, wide, and oddly calm. It looked like dawn trying to start, but giving up halfway through. I swallowed and kept staring. The glow faded after a few seconds, the sky returning to its usual blackness. The hum never wavered. I felt strangely small, standing alone in the middle of my yard at a time when the rest of the world slept. "Okay, what is this?" I muttered. No response. The sound drifted across the open space, low and smooth, like air moving through something massive out of view. I walked a little farther, just to the edge of where the tall grass met the fence. The night around me stayed perfectly still. No crickets, no birds. Even the usual rustle of leaves felt muted. Then the horizon blossomed white again, brighter this time, still not harsh, just more present. The glow pulsed faintly, slow and deliberate. It didn't race across the sky, it didn't flicker. It just hovered low, as if resting against something far away I couldn't see. The hum deepened, almost imperceptibly, but enough that the change made my spine tighten. I stepped back a pace, unsure if that made more sense than standing still. My eyes stayed locked on the light as it slowly faded for the third time. The sky darkened. The fields returned to shadow. The hum softened slightly, but remained. From the corner of my eye, I noticed a faint shimmer moving just above the crop line, far off in the distance. Not a solid shape, just a slight distortion, like air bending. I squinted, trying to focus. The shimmer drifted once, then twice, then stopped. Then it vanished. I felt a chill run through me that had nothing to do with the night air. I took a slow step backward, boots crunching softly against the damp soil. The hum slowly diminished as if moving further away, though the fields never showed movement. Silence crept back gradually. Within seconds, the night returned to its normal stillness, broken only by wind brushing the grass. I stood frozen where I was, staring into the darkness that had just held something undeniably strange. Nothing returned. The horizon remained quiet. No more glow, no more sound. I waited another minute, then another, until my breath visibly puffed in the cool air. Slowly, reluctantly, I walked back toward the house. The porch light flicked on when I stepped close, casting familiar yellow over the steps. The normal hum of my refrigerator through the wall grounded me again, pulling me back into the ordinary. Inside, everything felt the way it always had. Same dim hallway, same quiet ticking clock on the wall. Still, the memory of those few seconds clung to me. I stayed awake the rest of the night, lying on top of the covers, staring at the ceiling, listening for the hum to return. It didn't. Morning light crept in, pale and normal through the curtains. Birds resumed their usual chatter. A tractor somewhere down the road kicked to life as it always did. The fields looked the same, the horizon ordinary. Later that afternoon, I asked my neighbor Clara if she'd heard anything strange overnight. She shook her head. Slept like a rock. I didn't push it further. That evening, when the sun started dropping and shadows stretched long over the land, I found myself glancing toward the same spot on the horizon more than I realized. Nothing appeared. The sky stayed calm. But that night, just before sleep took me again, I caught the faintest vibration through the window frame for half a second, like a whisper of the same hum, distant and gentle. Then it disappeared, and the darkness settled back around the house like it always had, quiet and familiar, as if the wide open land simply chose not to speak again. The first light appeared right as I set my coffee down on the cold wooden railing. It was just after 5 in the morning, that thin stretch of time before the sun even thought about coming up. I'd driven out to Harrow Point because I couldn't sleep again, and the pier was the only place around here that felt quiet without feeling crowded. The ocean was flat and dark, the air damp with that salty chill that crept into your bones if you stood still too long. My name's Callum Pierce, and I'd lived along this stretch of coast most of my life. I knew what boats looked like at a distance. I knew what buoys looked like. I knew how the moonlight hit the water when the sky stayed clear. This wasn't any of that. A small white dot just hovered above the surface about 50 yards out, glowing faintly like a reflection that forgot to ripple. It didn't bob. It didn't waver. It just held there, perfectly still, as if pinned to the air. I frowned and squinted, trying to find some rational angle for it. Maybe a fishing light? Maybe someone had anchored a boat in the dark. Then another light appeared beside it. Then another. 3, 4, 5. A neat row of pale points arranged in a gentle curve, hovering just above the slowly breathing water. No sound came from them, no buzzing, no splash. The waves moved beneath without ever disturbing their position. I set my mug down carefully and leaned forward, gripping the railing. "What are you?" I muttered, though my voice sounded strangely small against the open water. The fog hung low around the pier, thin enough to see through, but thick enough to blur the edges of everything. The lights glowed steady, almost calm. The longer I stared, the more wrong it felt that nothing else on the surface responded to them. A fishing boat should rock, should creak, should shift. These didn't. I glanced down the length of the pier behind me, half expecting to see someone else standing there staring too. But the boards stretched empty past the old bait shack, damp and dark, no movement except an occasional seagull settling. I looked back at the lights. They hadn't moved at all. My pulse quickened, not explosive panic, just awareness. Like when you realize a stranger has been standing too close for too long. Then, without slowing, the first light sank straight down. No ripple, no splash. Just dipped below the surface and vanished. Then the second followed, then the third. They didn't drift. They didn't fade. Each one lowered with strange precision and disappeared beneath the water like it was being gently pulled into another place. The last light remained for a few seconds longer, hovering alone, then sank as well. The ocean returned to darkness. I stood frozen, half bent over the railing, waiting to see something surface. Waiting for a wave or a sign that any of it made sense. Nothing came, just gentle water and a tired fog. I straightened slowly and looked around again as if someone had to be messing with me. The horizon looked empty, no boats, no silhouettes, no reflections. A thin breeze stirred the back of my neck. I waited another minute, then another. Nothing reappeared. The logical part of my brain tried to step in, maybe lights from a distant structure, maybe reflections from a passing vessel I couldn't see, but the way they lowered so cleanly didn't line up with anything I knew. I turned and walked halfway down the pier, listening to my shoes tap softly against the damp planks. The gulls stayed quiet. The water lapped slow and even. Everything else returned to its normal state, like nothing odd had occurred. But the feeling didn't fade. I kept glancing out across the same stretch of water, expecting the lights to break through again. They didn't. I let out a slow breath and told myself I'd imagined the sinking part, that maybe fatigue and fog had twisted perspective, that I just needed sleep. Still, I didn't feel brave enough to walk back toward the car right away. I leaned against one of the wooden support posts and watched the horizon until the sky began to lighten just slightly. A soft gray started bleeding into the far edge of the ocean. The fog thinned. The day crept back. Just as I began to relax, I noticed another faint glow farther down the water. A single point. Motionless. My shoulders tensed faster this time. It didn't multiply. It just stayed there, barely shimmering, the same pale white I'd seen before. I held my breath, waiting. Slowly, another appeared beside it. Then another. A new row forming farther out. My skin prickled. I stepped closer to the edge of the pier, ignoring the slick boards under my boots. The lights hovered again, just above the surface, maintaining the same careful spacing as before. The fog around them caught the glow faintly, creating a dim halo. They stayed still for longer this time. Longer than felt comfortable. No boat emerged, no explanation revealed itself. Then, one by one, they sank again. Straight down. Gone. The ocean smoothed over as if they'd never been there at all. A sickness twisted gently in my stomach, not sharp, not overwhelming, just unsettled. Like something had calmly happened in front of me and refused to include any logic. I backed away from the railing and glanced over my shoulder again, the quiet behind me suddenly feeling heavier than usual. Still no one. I told myself this time I was leaving. I turned and walked down the length of the pier toward the parking lot, every creak of the wood echoing louder than it should have. The air warmed slowly as the sun started painting pale color along the edge of the horizon. From the lot, I couldn't see the same spot where the lights had hovered, but the calm of the water felt deceptive now, like it remembered something I didn't. The drive home passed without anything else strange. Normal early traffic. Normal sleepy faces at the corner gas station. Normal light blooming across the town like it always had. Still, every time I thought about that moment, the sinking of those lights replayed too clearly. That evening, after the sun dipped and the sky returned to soft gray, I found myself checking the time without fully meaning to. By 9, sleep still wouldn't come. By 10, I felt pulled again. I didn't fight it. I drove back to the pier, parking in almost the same spot as before. The air felt calmer now, less fog, more still. The water darker. I walked out slowly, each step carrying more weight than before. The pier greeted me with the same hollow quiet. I reached the railing and stared across the black surface. No lights, just water. I stayed there for a long while, scanning and waiting. Then, faintly, a single glow appeared far out, lower than before, dimmer. It hovered for just a moment like a quiet reminder, and then it sank, gone again. The sky returned to darkness, leaving only the faint reflection of stars rippling across the calm water. The faint clicking pulled me out of sleep in the softest way, like something tapping rhythmically just outside the window. I opened my eyes and lay still, listening. The room was dark except for the pale digital glow of the alarm clock on my nightstand. 3:17 a.m. The clicking continued, slow and steady, like a quiet mechanical sound that didn't belong to any appliance in the house. My name's Rowan Ellerby, and I lived alone in a small cabin on the edge of Pine Hollow, about 15 minutes outside Larchmont. It was the kind of place people called peaceful during the day and too quiet at night. No street lights, no close neighbors, just trees, gravel, and wind most of the time. But this wasn't wind. The clicking had a pattern, soft, controlled, almost deliberate. I pushed the blankets aside and swung my feet onto the cold floorboards, keeping my movements slow so I didn't fully wake the house. The sound came from outside my bedroom window, which faced the tree line. I stepped closer and gently pulled the curtain back. A soft glow drifted between the branches, not bright enough to illuminate the ground, but clear enough to be seen. It moved sideways, sliding slowly behind the tree trunks like it knew exactly where to go. Not bobbing, not flickering, just gliding. The clicking stopped. I held my breath, staring into the dark. The glow slipped farther into the woods and then vanished behind the thickest cluster of trees, leaving the forest pitch black again. My heart beat slow and heavy in my chest. The night returned to silence. I stayed there for a full minute, waiting for the noise to resume or the light to return. Nothing happened. It was probably just some animal in a reflection, I muttered, even though I didn't believe it. I stepped back from the window and sat on the edge of the bed, trying to steady myself. The quiet pressed in again. I strained to hear anything else outside. A breeze. Leaves. Anything normal. Nothing. Eventually, I lay back down, telling myself I'd imagined most of it. I must have fallen asleep again because the next thing I knew, pale morning light filtered through the curtains. The first thing I did was check outside. No glow, no disturbance, just dew on leaves and the faint mist that always lingered around the base of the trees early in the morning. The rest of the day passed uneventfully, but I couldn't shake the unsettled feeling. Every creak of the house, every distant rustle of branches, made my attention snap toward the window. That night, I made a habit of locking every door, double-checking the latch on the windows, and turning on the porch light earlier than usual. I told myself it was just caution. Sleep came in shallow waves. Then, around the same hour, the clicking returned. It was softer this time, but clearer. A precise tick-tick-tick, not irregular like twigs snapping or leaves brushing wood. It sat just beyond the edge of the window like something patiently waiting. I didn't move right away. The sound shifted slightly, then paused. My pulse picked up. After a few seconds, it started again, lighter now, almost careful. I forced myself to slide out of bed and step over to the window, dread coiling tight in my stomach. I pulled the curtain back slowly. The soft glow was back, slightly brighter than the night before. It drifted along the outer edge of the tree line, lower now, closer to the ground. Still silent, still smooth, still wrong. Whatever created it never revealed itself. The clicking stopped as the glow moved, as if linked somehow. The light hovered briefly, just long enough for my chest to tighten, then slipped back into the woods, swallowed by shadow. Gone again. I stayed frozen at the window, barely breathing, eyes scanning the now empty darkness. Nothing followed. The rest of the night dragged on with no further noise, but I never truly slept again. Morning light eventually crawled in through the trees like a slow forgiveness that didn't quite erase the memory. Later that day, curiosity chipped away at fear. I walked along the edge of the woods behind the cabin, careful but needing to know if anything unusual remained. No broken branches, no tracks, no signs of anyone or anything, just untouched forest floor. That evening, clouds rolled in, hanging low and heavy, muting what little moonlight might have offered. I sat on the edge of the bed, listening, waiting. The clicking didn't come immediately. When it did, it came closer, not pressed against the glass, but close enough that the sound felt intimate, like something just beyond reach. This time, I opened the curtain faster than before. The glow was there again, only now it traced a slower path between the trees, almost observing. I stood there longer, heart in my throat, eyes locked on it as it drifted past the trunk of a pine and disappeared behind another. The clicking returned briefly, then faded. I expected fear to fully take over, but what I felt was more confusion, like being watched by something that refused to fully reveal itself, something content to hover just beyond understanding. The nights that followed remained quiet. No clicking, no glow. Just ordinary darkness and occasional animal sounds that felt normal again. Still, every time I lay down and closed my eyes, part of me waited for that faint mechanical sound to return. The subtle sliding light threading through the trees like it had its own quiet purpose. Weeks passed without incident, but the sense that something had briefly brushed against my reality didn't dissolve. It just lingered, faint and unresolved, like a memory I couldn't place but couldn't forget either. A soft glow pressed through the edges of my curtains, thin and pale, like someone had parked a car right outside and left the high beams on. I squinted at it, still half in that heavy, fuzzy sleep where everything feels slow. I checked my phone on the nightstand. It read 2:18 a.m., no notifications, no missed calls, just the time and the dull blue screen. The glow didn't pulse or move. It just stayed there, seeping in around the fabric in a way that felt wrong somehow. Too even, too quiet. I rolled onto my back and listened. No engines, no footsteps, no voices outside, just the low hum of my fridge through the wall and the faint ticking of the old heater. After a few seconds, curiosity won out over comfort. I pushed myself up and crept over to the window, bare feet cold against the floorboards. I slid the curtain aside slowly, expecting to see a car or maybe some weirdo shining a flashlight around the yard. Instead, I saw the pale glow lifting upward. It rose straight up past the top of the window frame, soundless, smooth, like a dim orb or dome drifting into the dark. No flicker, no trail. Just a quiet retreat into the cloudy sky until the night swallowed it. The backyard looked normal again. My fence, the patch of overgrown grass, the crooked old bird bath. No source for the light anywhere. I stood there, curtain still in my hand, staring out like I'd missed something important by a second. My name's Adrian Velez. I lived alone in a rented duplex just outside Port Angeles, close enough to hear the distant waves when the wind shifted right. It had been drizzling earlier that evening, the kind of light coastal rain that left everything damp and smelling slightly metallic already, but this felt different. I cracked the window open a few inches and leaned out. Cold air rolled in, salty and wet. No fresh light, no noise. Just darkness and the soft murmur of far-off surf. I waited. Nothing else happened. Eventually, I shut the window and pulled the curtains closed. I stood there a while longer, listening for an engine start or footsteps on wet gravel, but the night stayed still. Back in bed, sleep didn't come easy. Every tiny sound made my eyes snap open. The old floor creaking in the hallway, the pipes shifting as the heater kicked on and off. I kept glancing back at the curtains, half expecting that glow to seep through again. It didn't. When I finally drifted off, it was shallow and restless. The next morning was gray and foggy, the kind of fog that smeared the outline of everything and made distance hard to judge. I convinced myself maybe I'd imagined the whole thing. Half dream, half reflection of passing headlights. That happens sometimes. But when I stepped out onto the back porch to take the trash out, I noticed the grass right beneath my bedroom window looked flattened in a neat circular patch. Not trampled, exactly, just gently bent, like something had pressed down evenly and then lifted away. I crouched, running my fingers over the damp blades. No footprints, no tire tracks, just that smooth, shallow depression in the grass. I shook it off and went about my day. By afternoon, I was back at my job on the docks, unloading shipments with my coworker Mateo, trying not to think about it. But all day I caught myself glancing up at the low clouds, scanning for anything out of place. Nothing appeared. That evening, I mentioned it casually to my neighbor Denise while we both checked our mail. "You ever see weird lights around here at night?" I asked, trying to sound normal. She laughed softly. "Only the usual drunk tourists and their flashlights." "Why?" "Just thought I saw something last night. Probably a reflection." She shrugged and shuffled back inside, not concerned at all. The next few nights passed quietly, enough to lull me even more into thinking it had been a fluke. But then, 3 days later, it happened again. This time, I wasn't asleep. I'd been lying on the couch watching a rerun with the volume low when the living room slowly filled with that same pale light. It crept across the carpet and up the walls like fog made of glow. I muted the TV and sat up straight. The glow wasn't harsh. It wasn't warm either, just steady and dim enough to notice. I approached the sliding glass door that looked out to the backyard. Outside, floating just above the fence line, a rounded haze of light hung completely still. No shape I could clearly define, but not just mist either. It held its form in an unnatural way, like it had edges that my eyes refused to focus on. My throat tightened. I stood there frozen, hand hovering over the door handle, unsure whether opening it was the worst decision or the only way to prove I wasn't losing it. The glow slid sideways, slow and deliberate, tracing along the top of the fence before drifting upward again into the fog, dissolving without a sound. The backyard returned to darkness. I looked at my phone again. 11:36 p.m. This time, the signal bars flickered and dropped to 0 before settling back. A chill crept along my arms. The air felt heavier for a moment, pressed flat and still. Even the distant ocean noise seemed to fade. I didn't open the door. I just stood there until my legs started shaking. That night, I double-checked every lock, every latch, every window. When I finally crawled into bed, I left the curtains slightly open, eyes fixed on the glass, replaying that silent upward drift over and over. Sometime after midnight, I heard a faint vibration through the floor, almost like a large truck passing, except there was no rumble to go with it. Just enough motion to make the water in the bedside glass ripple slightly. Then it stopped. No glow this time, no light, just subtle silence again. I stayed awake for hours, staring, listening, trying to piece together what kind of normal thing could cause all of this. Morning came slow and colorless. The fog clung to the edges of everything. I stepped outside again and noticed the same subtle flattening in the grass, extended farther this time, wider, almost like an impression from something round, but too light to leave actual marks. I felt embarrassed even thinking of it, but I still took a photo on my phone. When I checked the image later, the patch looked less defined than I remembered, just slightly darker grass. The following night, I didn't see the glow, but I smelled it instead. That cold metallic scent drifted faintly through my bedroom, sharp and clean, nothing like damp soil or ocean air. It lingered for a minute, then vanished as if someone had shut a door on it. I sat up, heart hammering, listening for movement outside. Nothing came. By the end of the week, I started wondering if the house itself felt different, like some part of my space was being observed quietly, without urgency, just a presence that arrived, hovered, and left. Then one night, it returned for the last time. I lay in bed with my eyes half closed when the pale glow pushed through the edges of my curtains again. Soft, steady, familiar in a way that made my pulse race. I slid the curtains open. The light hovered higher this time, just beyond the roofline, casting a faint sheen over the wet shingles and fence. Then slowly it lifted, as if responding to nothing but its own quiet timing, and drifted into the cloud cover above. The sky sealed behind it. The street stayed empty. No voices, no engines, just the distant hush of the ocean and the soft creak of my old house settling. I closed the curtains and stood there a long time, letting my eyes adjust back to darkness, trying to make any kind of sense of it all. Nothing else happened after that. No more pressing glow, no humming, no strange patches in the yard. But some nights, when the fog hung low and the curtains stirred slightly in the breeze, I still found myself staring at the window, waiting for that soft, shapeless light to quietly slide upward again. A dark shape slid across the stars so smoothly that at first I thought my eyes were just tired. I'd been laying on the hood of my car in the middle of the High Mesa turnout, the spot a few miles outside of Arroyo Vista, where the light pollution finally drops off. It was late summer, still warm even after sunset, and the sky looked clear enough that the stars felt close. The air carried that dry, dusty smell you only get out there when the heat finally lets go. I'd come alone, which wasn't unusual for me. Stargazing was my way of shutting my brain off after a long week at the hardware store. No phones, no music, just quiet and the sky. When the shape first moved overhead, it wasn't dramatic. It didn't flash or sparkle. It simply erased the stars behind it for a few seconds, like someone dragging a shadow across the night. I lifted my head slowly. The shape glided from east to west, wide and soft-edged, darker than the space around it. Not a plane, not a helicopter. It made no sound at all. No whine, no rumble, nothing that fit anything I'd ever heard. I rolled off the hood and stood up, eyes tracking it. It kept moving at the same even speed, never wobbling, never changing rhythm. It didn't blink or show any lights, just absence where the stars should have been. My name's Dominic Salazar. I'd grown up in that area and knew the difference between normal aircraft and weird shadows passing over a sky full of stars. This thing didn't fit any of it. I leaned against the driver's side door and kept watching. The shape eventually slipped beyond the brighter band of stars and into the darker stretch toward the horizon where the desert met the hills, and then it was gone. No fade, no reveal, just empty sky again. I waited, half expecting something else to follow it, but the world stayed quiet. Crickets chirped faintly. A breeze brushed past, barely cool. I told myself I'd imagined it. Long day, restless head, nothing more. So I climbed back onto the hood and stared upward again. 10 minutes passed. Then the stars dimmed slightly, just for a heartbeat, like someone turned a dial down and back up again. Not the whole sky, just a wide patch almost directly overhead. I sat up slowly. The air felt heavier against my skin, like pressure building before a storm, except the forecast had been clear all night. My breathing sounded too loud in my ears. Then it happened again. That same smooth, silent movement passed across the sky, this time directly above me. Closer. The shape wasn't sharp enough to define, but it was definitely there. A broad shadow slipping over constellations I knew well enough to notice when they disappeared. I strained to see its outline, but the edges blurred like it didn't want to show itself fully. No sound, not even the faint rush of air. It glided past, slow and measured, like it had time. My heart started thudding harder, not from panic, but pure confusion mixed with something colder underneath. I wasn't scared yet, just unsettled in a way that felt quiet and deep. When it cleared the stars again, the sky returned to normal, but the stillness lingered. A minute later, my phone buzzed beside me on the hood. I picked it up instinctively. No signal. That didn't make sense out there. Even in bad pockets, I usually had something. I slid it back down without checking again and kept staring upward. The desert fell into an odd quiet then. No crickets, no brush rustle. Even the faint sound of wind vanished. The sky looked the same, but it felt like I was being watched by something that had no reason to announce itself. Then, far above, a pale flicker appeared, faint and almost shy. It pulsed once, twice, then steadied. Not bright enough to illuminate anything. Just a soft point that hung there unmoving. I didn't blink. The dark shape returned beneath it, moving even slower now, drifting in a line that didn't follow any normal path. It didn't cast shadows or block moonlight because there wasn't any strong moon that night. It only swallowed small islands of starlight as it went. My throat went dry. I whispered without thinking, "What are you?" No response. The flicker above dimmed slightly, then both the dark shape and the light slid toward the edge of the sky, gradually leaving my view like something backing out of a room. I waited. The stars filled in the gaps they'd left behind. The quiet began to feel too big. Eventually, the desert sounds crept back, one by one, cautious and ordinary, like nothing strange had passed through. I stood there for a long time after, just breathing, trying to line up what I saw with anything familiar. I couldn't. Eventually, I got into my car and drove home, the headlights carving narrow tunnels through the night road. The dashboard clock showed I'd been out there almost 40 minutes longer than I realized. When I pulled into my driveway, the sky above my house looked calm and empty. Over the next few nights, I returned to the same turnout, half out of curiosity and half because something in me needed to understand what I'd seen. The sky stayed normal every time. except once, just once, when a faint strip of darkness moved quietly overhead, barely noticeable, like a slow blink across the stars that left no mark behind.